This is a redo of May 28, 2021. Why was junior year so crazy but yet so calm? Storytime 22. This is the final Storytime in the 3-part redo series I'm doing of my high school years before graduating this December. It's pretty crazy to think that I'm graduating in 2 months, and so I thought it would be really neat to look over my high school years now as a senior. Now, like freshman and sophomore year, I have my own specific reasons as to why I'm redoing junior year. The main reason is because I thought it would be neat to look over this time period much later. I began work on Storytime 22 script on April 30th, 3 weeks before the last day of junior year and 4 weeks before the expected release day for that Storytime. Therefore, the month of May was more like a journal since I was writing the events down the night they happened. That explains why May took up over half the entire Storytime. Therefore, I am redoing the Storytime to finish the 3-part series as well as to reflect on this school year from a few months afterwards. I also recommend watching Storytime 30 and 33 to get better understanding of how my school works. So, junior year is one of the most important school years you will ever have. This is the main year colleges look like. This is also the school year where you take the ACT. For some, this is also the school year that you get your driver's license. For this school year, it's a pretty big deal. However, my junior year was really weird. It was by far the weirdest, most unusual, as well as probably the worst school year ever. So today, I'm going to talk about my junior year. I'm Zach, this is Storytime 37 on October 1st, 2021. So first off, where do I go to school? Well, I go to an early college high school. This is where I get both a high school diploma and an associate's in either arts or science for free when I graduate. I'm going to be getting an associate in science. Anyways, I had to apply here in 8th grade. Only about 30% of students were accepted. I was fortunate enough to be included in that 30%. Now, probably the most important piece of backstory to mention is to go back to March 2020. This was late into sophomore year. On March 15th, we got a call saying that we would have to do school from home for 2 weeks due to the rapidly growing coronavirus pandemic. 2 weeks then turned into the rest of the school year. Online school sucked, as my parents were really strict about it. Online school also messed with my grades, as some grades rose while others fell. Now, the summer of 2020 was also not very memorable. We didn't do a whole lot. While we still went to the beach in July, all we did there was quarantine in the beach house. However, that's not to say I didn't do anything productive during the summer of 2020. During that summer, I took 2 online college courses. They were World Civilizations and Business Law. Both courses were really enjoyable. I'm in a 95 in both courses. I also got my license that summer too. I also got a truck to go along with it. This was my grandfather's truck, who died in 2016. He left the truck in my name, and since I got my license 2 months after my 16th birthday, I got the truck. Although the truck is old and doesn't run the best, it still runs good enough and it's small, something I needed as a new driver. Therefore, instead of riding a bus or driving with my grandmother to school, I drove myself to school throughout junior year, and I currently drive myself to school every day now as a senior. So now, since coronavirus was plaguing the world, school worked a lot differently. So we could either be hybrid learning or be fully remote. I chose to do hybrid learning. This is where you go to school for like 2 days every week, and then you are remote the rest of the week. Hybrid students were split into 2 cohorts in order to maintain social distancing standards. These cohorts were creatively named Cohort A and Cohort B. Cohort A consists of students whose last name ranged from A to L, and Cohort B consisted of students whose last name ranged from L to Z. My last name is of course Baynard, so I was Cohort A. We also had to wear a mask all day, which was really difficult. It was harder to learn with the mask on, and they fogged up my glasses too. We would also begin school later on. We normally begin school the first or second week of August. However, I guess because of COVID, they wanted to start the school year a little bit later. Therefore, the first day was not until August 17th, 2020. However, our last day was planned to be May 25th, although that will change. Anyways, let's move on to the first day of school. So my first class was American History 1. We took American History 1 in the first semester, and then we took American History 2 in the second semester. The difference between the 2 courses were that American History 1 went from the age of colonization to Reconstruction after the Civil War, while American History 2 went from Reconstruction after the Civil War to the presidency of George W. Bush in 9/11. So, our teacher for American History was pretty cool. He was the same guy who I had for study hall as a freshman. He often referred to me as Brother Baynard, although I am not too sure where that came from. He also was notable for having multiple voice cracks while doing lectures. Like as an example, later on in the year we discussed the difference between communism and capitalism. But when saying both terms in conjunction to one another, he would shout, "Communism and capitalism." Stuff like these really made this class very fun and entertaining. Another thing to mention about him is that he had at the back Let me redo that. Another thing to mention about him is that at the back of his room, he kept a list of funny as well as really dumb quotes that were said throughout the year. Some examples include dumb countries, like Africa, from Virginia to America, and Hitler was born in Australia. None of my quotes ever got on there, unfortunately, although I still said some stuff that could qualify as contenders. There were also quite a lot of funny moments that involving me that could be put up on the board if this wasn't strictly quotes. After American history came seminar. So our school is an expeditionary learning school. Seminar is for expeditionary learning. This curriculum involves us going out and doing hands-on activities to better understand the world around us. Then we would go back and do a project that corresponded to that exercise. Each grade had a specific question for seminar. Junior year's question was, where am I going? We call these intensives, but as you can expect, coronavirus messed that up, so we didn't really do any of the stuff that was planned. Like the second week of school, we were supposed to stay at Brevard College for a few nights, and then in January, we were going to go to the Biltmore House, but that all got cancelled. However, we still had to do the intensive projects. I thought this was a bad idea because we hadn't done the activity, so what was the point of doing the project that went along with it? I'll explain what we did later on. Now, after seminar came both crew and lunch. Now, crew is a difficult class to explain, simply because nobody at my school knows how to define it. Our teachers can't, the principal can't, me and the other seniors can't, nobody can. In fact, our American history teacher's definition is crew, but I did an entire story time on crew, being Storytime 11. Although it is an older story time, I do recommend it in case you were lost. Now, normally, we only did crew on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. However, in order to practice social distancing, we ate lunch in crew. My crew was with my freshman English teacher, whom I will also have later on in the year. So who was I with in crew? Well, nobody. I was the only student in crew. At least me and my freshman English teacher had and still have a great relationship, so that made it up. Now, after lunch and crew came study hall. Many students had a college math course called Quantitative Literacy. I took this course as a sophomore, therefore I simply had a study hall. I also had taken pre-calc as a sophomore as well, so I didn't even take that. I still needed one more math course, which I would take in the spring, so for now, I just had a study hall. This provided me with a lot of extra time, which as a result, I got all of my work done ahead of time. I did study hall with two girls, who also just so happened to take quantitative literacy as sophomores, just that they didn't want to take pre-calc until senior year. Now, the interesting part about study hall was the teacher. So he was from Los Angeles. I guess he determined that California is a shithole, so he came over to the East Coast. And I can't blame him. I sure am glad I live in North Carolina rather than California or some state out west. Anyways, he was working on his teaching degree during this time, so he was a TA this year. He eventually got his degree near the end of the school year, and I believe he's now a teacher somewhere else. However, the really interesting part is that I had him in 7th grade. So I left this detail out in Storytime 15, but he worked as an intern when our science teacher left his job. He was an intern for about a month, which then afterwards we got a new permanent science teacher. He actually recognized me, which I did the same, so that was really cool. After study hall came chemistry. So like my study hall teacher, I also had a little bit of a past with my chemistry teacher. So this was her first year at our school. Previously, she taught at the middle school I went to. She taught 8th grade science as well as environmental science. She was also the leader of the Science Olympiad team. I did not have her for 8th grade science, but I was a part of the Science Olympiad team in both 7th and 8th grade. I also took environmental science under her, so I knew her. She also recognized me, so it was really neat having her again, as she was really cool. Anyways, chemistry was a fun class. We did a lot of labs, many of which involved us blowing stuff up. This class was a blast, no pun intended. It was very easy too, much easier than I thought. We'll just see how easier this class was through my grades. Now, one important thing to note about chemistry is that I have a favorite element, that element being francium. Francium is the very bottom element of the alkali metals, which are known for being the most reactive elements on the periodic table. Francium just so happens to be the most reactive of the bunch. Although unknown because francium only has a lifespan of only like 30 minutes, if it was to react in water, it would probably make a huge explosion and the water would probably be set on fire. That is why francium is my favorite element. Keep this in mind, as francium is going to be used very commonly in many projects and other assignments for chemistry later on. Now, after chemistry came a college course. Now, normally in Storytime, I wait until a little bit later to discuss college. However, junior year was back far enough so that it would be right when college began. Therefore, I get to go ahead and discuss my college courses. Well, a college course. I had only 3 college courses, 2 of which were online. Anyways, that in-person college course was Spanish. This course introduced us to the Spanish language. It went over vocabulary, definite and indefinite articles, grammar, and more. It was really easy, most because websites like Spanish didn't exist. Anyways, Spanish was fun. Our professor was also really good. She's from Pennsylvania, so we made fun of her northern accent quite a lot. However, she could also perfect a Spanish accent, which she did all the time whenever she spoke Spanish as an example, so Spanish was fun. Now, like all other college courses, every assignment we did in Spanish was online. Our online assignments included a list of quizzes. We could take these quizzes as many times as we wanted to, and only our highest grade would be counted. These quizzes were really helpful to understanding the topics, as I could go back and learn what I missed and then apply it to different situations. However, our teacher would switch methods for some reason in December, which I'll discuss later on. Now, I went to school on the 17th and 18th, being Monday and Tuesday, respectively. But how did Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday work? Well, of course, these were remote days. This means that I did not have to go to school these days, but that's not to say I wasn't productive. In fact, most of my schoolwork was done on these days since I couldn't concentrate. Since I could concentrate, and it was not during instruction time. But it's not to say that these days had some distractions. So I live in a household of 4. I live with my parents and my sister, who was in 8th grade during this time. My dad is a lead buyer, and my mom is a teacher. Dad's job requires him to make calls and do meetings with suppliers, and Mom's job involves her using Zoom to interact with our students. Both of them yell pretty loudly when they're doing meetings. However, Dad sets up his office in the living room, while Mom takes the main office. My bedroom is pretty far away from the living room, but it's very close to the office. So you bet it was difficult to concentrate when Mom was yelling into her mic. Not only that, but Mom was also a drill sergeant quite a lot on Wednesdays whenever she wasn't working, so that made it even harder to concentrate. Fortunately, Mom had to work in person on Thursdays and Fridays to teach cohort B at her school, so I had Thursdays and Fridays to fully focus on my own work without distraction, and it worked out really well. Most of the time, I would get all my work done on Thursday, so on Friday, I didn't do anything. Everything was due on Fridays, so that made it very easy to organize my stuff. I should go ahead and mention that everything we did was online so that it wouldn't spread germs on paper. We all have our own Chromebooks. Even though the Chromebooks are shit, they still allow us to do our work. So now let's move on to the next week, now that you understand how the semester worked, or this year worked. Let's talk more about seminar. So Monday, August 24th, we were ordered to look at a debt clock. This showed us how much student debt there were in the US, and it was not a pretty sight. Like, I think it was around $1.5 trillion. That's a lot of money. We also looked at some other statistics that I forgot, and they announced that what we will be doing. We were going to be doing a project on a college assigned to us. Normally, we would be in groups of 5 working on a trifold, and then underclassmen would look at them and grade them. That's what we did when we were underclassmen. We got to grade theirs. However, COVID made us take a different path. We were paired up with 2 other face-to-face students, but we were also paired up with 2 remote students. We had to create a video of our assigned college. Our group's assigned college was the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, although I'll call it Carolina since I'm much more familiar with the college basketball terms. Anyway, we were also given an assigned structure for our group. We were supposed to have 2 students, preferably the remote students, do the research. One student be the anchorman in the video, another student working on the behind the scenes, and then a student who edited the video. We, however, did it a little differently. We all seemed to do some of everything, except the anchorman and editing. Now, we also did different jobs. Our anchorman and editing guy did all the behind the scenes. I wrote the script for the video, as I have some expertise in this field, although this was a couple months before Storytime. Then the anchorman recorded everything from his garage. Our editing guy has expensive editing software, so he edited it. This project was due on September 18th, and the editing guy finished it on that day. We did great on it. We didn't get a numerical grade for it, we just simply passed, as seminar is a pass or fail course. This project, however, was required in order to pass seminar, so we got it done. Now, back to August, let's talk about chemistry. So our first project for chemistry involved us having to do an all about me assignment. Here we pretty much wrote down information about ourselves, but in a chemistry type way. We had to write it down like we were writing down an element on the periodic table. Now, I do not have any surviving evidence of this project. However, I do remember including my name, my birthday, and a few other stuff. As for images, I included a picture of my cat, a meme, and most importantly, the periodic square for francium. This is the first of many times francium was used in a chemistry project. Now, moving on to the next week, on August 31st. So this was the day that online college courses began, so let's talk about them. So the first one was a co-requisite to Spanish. It was Spanish Lab. Our instructor for the Spanish Lab was the same instructor for in-person Spanish, so we could ask her questions in person if we were confused with anything. Now, there wasn't necessarily any instruction specific to the Spanish lab, as all the instruction was in Spanish class. Therefore, the Spanish lab was pretty much just extra assignments. There were 3 for each module. One involved us doing a discussion board where we answered a prompt in Spanish, and then we would have to respond to a classmate in Spanish. Another assignment involved us creating a 50-slide presentation with a Spanish word and an image to go along with it. Then we were also had to do speaking assignment. This involved us recording ourselves answering questions in Spanish. Although this was the least time-consuming assignment, it was also the hardest part of the entire course, as I have such a deep and hard voice that it's hard to sound soft. On top of that, this was before Storytime, so I wasn't exactly the best at reading off a paper. By the way, we wrote down the answers to our questions and then we read off them. Our professor told us to do that, so that's what I did. Even so, it was challenging because Spanish also has many rules on pronunciation that to an English speaker sounds unusual. So I had to remind myself that every time it was not por favor, it was por favor. Now, the other online college course I took was writing an inquiry, which I'll refer to as writing. So, if you're watching this Storytime right now, you can probably guess that I enjoy writing. After all, Storytimes are simply just me reading my writings aloud to the public, so I was excited to take this course. However, my professor was a lot like my sociology professor in the sense of grading. Not by screaming, "No, no, 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 that is not my policy!" So, if you watch Storytime 33, you know that my sociology professor would give me high A's on papers, but not like 100s. But he never explained why I lost those few points. This professor was the same way. He never gave me any feedback on my papers, which really sucked since I didn't know what I was doing wrong and therefore couldn't improve. Now, even though my professor sucked, I still had a lot of fun writing the papers for this class. I'll discuss each paper individually, as each one is really interesting and really fun to read. Each paper had a prompt we had to answer, by the way, and I'll discuss each one when I discuss each paper. Now, for each paper, we were generally given 2 weeks to work. Each paper seemed to be due on a Monday, so while a little bit strange, I still managed to incorporate writing into my remote schedule, which made procrastination pretty much non-existent. I don't even recall doing anything at the last minute for really any class throughout the first semester of junior year, so that's kind of how the 3 remote days benefited me. Well, 2 if you don't count the loud mom day. So now let's move on to September. September 2020 was honestly the most forgettable month and of one of the most memorable years. However, I still remember some things that happened in regards to school this month. I'll start out by discussing our first project for American history. So I believe for our 4th day of school, we talked about the American dream. We talked about what it is and what it means to us because America, damn it! However, we were challenged to present the American dream on a half sheet of poster board. We also had to include multiple visual aspects. What I mean by visual aspects is artwork, which is something that I suck at, so this was hard. Now, my definition of the American dream was equality of opportunity without discrimination. My teacher really liked that idea. However, the artwork is what screwed up my project. So the artwork included a white hand shaking hands with a black hand, the word equality written in 6 different languages, I believe 4 different religious symbols, and some more details that I can't tell. I still have this with me, although over the past 13 months, my cat has been trying to screw it up as much as possible, so it's kind of difficult to read some parts, as he likes to scratch it for some reason. Now, this was the planned official version, but it never became the actual official version. The reason is because my teacher handed me back the project and said not yet. He told me that the artwork could do some work and I could detail the background more. So that's what it did. I redid the project, but this time I was more detailed and elaborate on my failed project. This one turned out to be a success. However, I only received like an 82 or an 83. Even though I don't agree with the grade, as I worked my ass off on this, I'm still happy and now I was allowed to redo the project. By the way, my cat hasn't scratched up the new project for some reason, which I also have in the same place as my old one. Not sure why he doesn't, but I mean, that's cat logic for you. Also in American history, we wrote our first document-based question paper, or DBQ. DBQs are where we were given some documents. From these documents, we must answer a prompt in the form of a 5-paragraph essay. 5-paragraph essays are papers with an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. We wrote a total of 4 DBQs throughout both American History 1 and 2. Our prompt for this DBQ was, how did Cabeza de Vaca survive? Cabeza de Vaca was a Spanish explorer in the 1500s who managed to survive in the wilderness for 9 years. When I say wilderness, I mean modern-day Texas and Mexico, which were of course foreign lands at the time. He was eventually found, and when he got back to Spain, he was pretty much treated like the greatest human being on the planet. However, surviving 9 years isn't even the impressive part. The impressive part is how he survived 9 years. In those 9 years, he learned 4 Native American languages, performed surgery on a wounded Native American, stored water in hollowed out horse legs, and so many other things. Yeah, this man was incredible. The praise he got back home was definitely well deserved. So as you can tell by the amount of body paragraphs there were, we had to write 3 reasons why he survived. I didn't dedicate specific examples, I just did general reasons and then used those examples to back up my reasons. My reasons were his relationship with the Native Americans, his survival knowledge, and his physical and mental strength. Now, I believe I only made a low B on this paper. However, we were allowed to redo it as much as we liked throughout the quarter. So even though this paper's due date was sometime in early September, the actual deadline was mid-October. I would redo it on October 6th, in which I received a high 8 on it, so that was much better. Now, we were also doing a project in chemistry, so this project involved us working with the thermohaline circulation. I hope I pronounced it. Thermohaline circulation is pretty much the process of how heat from the equator travels across the world through the water. So for this project, we were given multiple options. I chose the option that involved doing a Q&A newspaper article. I simply listed the question and answered it. Interestingly, I used Microsoft Word for this, which is a word processing software I use very rarely. However, for this project, it seemed like I had a skill at using Microsoft Word, as this was a very visually appealing paper. The page color was light blue to represent ocean water, and there were page borders. I had 2-column text, and it looked really great overall. My teacher agreed, so she awarded me the full 95 points. Now, why was this worth only 95 points? Well, the other 5 points came from reviewing other classmates' projects. We got to talk about what we liked and what we could think can be improved on. We only needed to do 5 of these. However, we could do all 35 of them and receive 35 points. So that's what I did. On Friday, September 11th, I spent all morning looking over every one of my classmates' projects. So I ultimately made a 120 on this. This was actually the second highest grade I ever received on an assignment. The highest was during sophomore year when I made a 300 on a test for a math course called Quantitative Literacy after my professor made a typo. But if you do not include mistakes, this is the highest grade I ever received on any assignment. I was the only person who did this, so my teacher gave me a shout out in class that Monday. So now, let's talk about college courses we're going. How college courses were going. So let's first talk about writing. I wrote 2 papers in September. My first paper for this course was about my writing experience, but it wasn't like Storytime 35 where I went into detail of all my milestone writings. It was more about why I've written in the past and how I improved. So compared to my writings now, this paper was not the greatest, as I noticed some grammatical errors and redundant sentences. However, it got to the point across and even still in a pretty clear way. Now, I like to consider my papers for writing to be the prototypes for Storytime. They were written very similarly, except that were written for a different purpose, and they were a lot shorter. Ironically, this was just a couple months before the conception of Storytime, so these papers really helped influence the Storytime format. I do not remember the grade I made on this, or really any other paper I wrote, but I do remember that this paper was due on September 14th. Now, the second paper I wrote was a how-to type writing. For this, I chose to write about how to troll Twitch streamers. I had a blast writing this, mainly because of my experience with this. I used to troll streamers a ton on Twitch. Take Geometry Dash as an example. Once a streamer was doing a thing called level request, where you give him the ID of a level and he'll play it. I gave him the ID to a level called the Golden, which was at the time the hardest level in the game. When he pulled it up, he immediately made that face that was like, "Damn it, you got me." So that's kind of what I discussed in this paper. However, I didn't use Geometry Dash or any specific game, I just discussed general universal trolling. Stuff like that, stuff like changing your username to iSwallow_cum and other stuff like that. Just not that, I did it with a more appropriate name. I also discussed a few other examples. Now, Spanish wasn't too memorable during this time, so we'll skip over that. However, I did want to talk about something that, while not necessarily related to school, it's still something that's really important in my life during this time in general. So I've explained the story about how I was suicidal in 8th grade and how I almost committed suicide multiple times already. Well, I didn't attempt suicide multiple times. I've talked about the situation multiple times. I explained it thoroughly in Storytime 28 if you're interested. Anyways, because of that whole incident that occurred on March 8th, 2018, I had to be taken to the mental hospital. Here I was prescribed a drug called Zoloft. Zoloft is a drug that slows down the nervous system that makes it harder to make one feel bad about themselves. Since then, I have been taking this drug every night. However, 2.5 years after the fact, I felt like the problems that were facing 13-year-old me were no longer affecting 16-year-old me. So therefore, I stopped taking it. The Zoloft served me well and when I needed it, but I ultimately decided that now it was time to move on. It's been over a year since I made that decision, and now at 17 years old, I can confidently say that this was the right choice. I'm not depressed anymore, and I'm still living life to the fullest. I also want to mention an honors club I was invited to join. So in September, I was invited to join the National Honor Society chapter at our school. If you remember how Beta Club worked back from Storytime 33, this should be a very simple subject to follow. National Honor Society, or NHS, is an honors club that is for juniors and seniors who maintain, I believe, at least a 3.7 unweighted GPA and don't get into any trouble. Pretty much the same as Beta Club, except sophomores aren't allowed to join and requires a higher GPA. My unweighted GPA was like 3.8 at the time, although now it's like 3.9 something, so I got an invitation to join. Now, just like everything else, coronavirus also messed us up. We never had any meetings. In fact, we never even did anything. We just simply were a part of the club. So now we can finally move on to October 2020. So October 2020 was also quite similar to September 2020, as it really just an uneventful month. However, there were a few notable things that occurred this month. First, I want to talk about one of 3 very important standardized tests I took in junior year. Due to coronavirus, our final exams were waived. However, these standardized tests aren't final exams. They are college entrance exams. I took a total of 4 of these throughout high school. The first one I took was the pre-ACT, which I took in November 2019. I explained my experience taking it in Storytime 33. However, the second one I took would not be until 11 months later. This would be the preliminary SAT, or the PSAT. This was an optional test my school was offering to any junior who was interested in taking the real SAT one day. I was interested in taking the SAT one day, so I took this offer. Most juniors also took it up too. So the exact date we took this test on was Wednesday, October 14th. So as you can probably guess, this test was created to model the SAT, just like it was in a different format. The PSAT had a grammar, reading, calculator inactive, and calculator active section. Of course, the grammar and reading were combined for my English, and the calculator inactive and calculator active were combined for my math score. Then my English and math sections were combined for my composite score. Now, the test itself went smoothly, although I do not remember the whole process of taking it. I do, however, remember that after taking it, we were provided with Chick-fil-A when we walked out of school, so that was nice bringing home a chicken sandwich. The rest of the day, I probably just laid around. Now, what did I make on the PSAT? Well, I made an 1150. That's actually really good, especially compared to the fact that I made a 21 on my pre-ACT. I did a whole lot better. The reason I did better is mainly because of the differences between the 2 tests. I am much better at critical thinking than I am answering 500 questions in a half an hour. We'll see this pattern when I discuss the real test later on in the story time. I also want to discuss crew. So I was no longer the only person in my crew. We had a sophomore who was remote who just got tired of doing online school, so he requested to go back in person. The school allowed him to, and so we went back in person. He was a pretty cool guy. We talked quite a lot since it was just only us 2. We shared memes back and forth during crew. But that isn't to say that's all we did. On October 13th, the day before taking the PSAT, our school hosted the crew Scavenger hunt. This is where each crew competes to do the most amount of tasks possible in like 2 hours. We got out a second block early to do this. However, how this worked was that we had to take pictures of us doing some tasks, whether it be by taking our pictures with a certain school administrator or taking a picture of us doing something or really just anything in general. We had to take a picture of our whole crew. This was a holistic task. Now, this was very easy to do because it was just me, the sophomore, and our crew leader. Since it was just us 3, we had a lot of mobility. However, there were also a problem with that. Because it was just us 3, that meant that it was only 3 people that were uploading pictures. Combined the fact that school Wi-Fi sucks, we actually did not get all the pictures uploaded. But it didn't matter, because we still won 2nd place, so we at least had that to brag about. So how about we talk about discussing how my classes were going. So first off, let's talk about those papers that I wrote for writing. The prompt for my 3rd paper was, should I do this? It was pretty much just given as advice. For this paper, I also decided to include some creative writing elements. My paper was, should I time travel back to 2020? I pretended like I was 75 years old, meaning this would be in 2079. I of course survived the apocalypse, being 2020. Now, this paper was probably more of a humorous paper rather than an actual advice paper. In the first paragraph, I said a lot of stereotypical old people things. One line in particular from this paragraph was, back in my day, we had no time machines. Throughout the paper, I made a ton of predictions about what would happen in current events. The second paragraph involves me predicting that the United States would join forces with South Korea and take over North Korea, California would become part of China, and the United States would purchase Hong Kong. The third paragraph goes into detail about coronavirus. I predicted that the United States, Japan, and India would declare war on China for the whole Wuhan incident. Then I wrote 1 to 2 line sentences about disasters each month. Like for January, I mentioned World War III. For March, I mentioned coronavirus. For May, I mentioned all the protests and riots and so on. For September, I mentioned the film Cuties, which was a movie by Netflix that pretty much glorifies pedophilia. I predicted that everyone involved in that creation of that film would receive a mandatory life sentence, although unfortunately that didn't happen. Now, this was written on October 5th. For October, I just talked about then President Donald Trump getting coronavirus. So what did I do for November and December? Well, I made more predictions. For November, I predicted that the Armenia attacks by Azerbaijan would escalate further and put all of Armenia into unrest, and it would turn into a global conflict where everyone got involved. That never happened, as the US notably stayed neutral, which in my opinion was a good call. For December, I predicted that multiple countries would leave the United Nations over Chinese influences. The countries I listed were the United States, Japan, India, South Korea, Israel, Great Britain, Canada, Spain, Saudi Arabia, and Sweden. More countries would follow suit. That also never happened, as nobody left the United Nations in 2020 or even 2021. The final paragraph was just about me talking about why I was glad to be living in 2020 as a teen rather than as an old man. Honestly, the pandemic happened at the perfect time. If it happened when I was like 13, which of course was when I was depressed, then I guarantee you this tragedy would have struck. If it had happened as an old man, then tragedy would have also probably struck. So in a way, I'm glad it was 2020 and not 2017 or 2018. So now let's move on to the fourth paper. This paper was written on October 19th. For this, our professor showed us a picture of keys. Our job was to analyze the set of keys and draw conclusions from it. I don't remember the picture, however, from the paper I could determine that what was probably on the keys. I mentioned that the car had the keys was registered in Canada. However, there was also an American flag on the keychain. By looking at this, I predicted that they were probably Canadian citizens who worked in the United States. I then predicted that they worked in either Michigan, Wisconsin, or Minnesota. More than likely it would be Michigan, as they probably worked in Detroit or somewhere in the Detroit metro area. Another prediction I made was why they left the keys. The keys were left at a crime scene. I predicted that they were the offender of that crime. I also predicted that they either robbed the store or they stole the car. I say that because any normal person would go back for their car keys. More than likely, this person was running away on foot, so they were not far away since I was supposedly analyzing this about 5 minutes after the keys were found. The fact that they also could be working in Detroit also backs up this claim. After all, we are talking about Detroit, which is one city that you can't have shit in. But overall, this is a really fun paper to write. It also helped build my critical thinking skills, as I had to draw a bunch of conclusions from just one picture of keys. I'm gonna take a soda break. Now let's talk about a pretty funny situation that happened in Spanish. This occurred on October 13th. Wow, the entire month was pretty much just this day. Anyways, in Spanish, me and my two friends, Lucas and Jackson, sat at the back of the room. Of course, being the boys in the back, you can guess that we did some pretty funny shit. Unfortunately, I do not remember much of the funny shit we did. However, I do remember one thing that happened, and that was only because I recorded it. So our professor gave us work time. This is when Jackson got his laptop out and decided that he was going to destroy it. He sat his laptop on a stool, and then bent it over until it started cracking. In the background, you could hear Lucas calling Jackson. We were the only three who saw this, as after the fact, Jackson would just put his laptop up. Our professor nor anyone else saw us. By the way, this was not his school laptop, it was his own personal laptop. Now, how about we move on to November? In my personal opinion, this was probably the worst month in 2020 due to a pretty devastating loss. I'm not going to mention it this story time like I did in Storytime 22 since it really doesn't pertain to school, but that's the main reason why November sucked. But on a brighter note, how about we talk about the project for American history? So we were talking about the Declaration of Independence. So if you actually read the Declaration of Independence, you might have a difficult time figuring out what it's saying. After all, not everyone speaks Thomas Jefferson, even though everyone is a hypocrite. So to accompany this, we had to pretty much rewrite the Declaration of Independence in a modern fashion, but we had to do it in a modern style. We had students do text messages and conversations, some did a breakup letters, and one student even did a diss track on King George III. I chose to do a breakup letter. I pretty much wrote to King George why he's a bad boyfriend and why we're breaking up with him. I also listed some reasons as to why we were breaking up with him. I should go and emphasize that by saying we, I mean the United States, not me, because I ain't gay. Anyways, we had to present these to the class. which is only in front of like maybe 7 people, so it really wasn't too bad. And plus, despite being super introverted, I can still manage large audiences very well and I can speak up loudly as well. So this went really well. I didn't stutter at all and was very engaging. I should go ahead and mention that I'm not bragging. I'm actually stating these things my teacher said about my presentation. Also in American history, we wrote our second DBQ. This DBQ was more of an opinionated DBQ. The prompt was the United States justified in going to war with Mexico? This is referring to the Mexican-American War in 1845 when Mexico was pissed off that we annexed Texas. So we fought a war and then we annexed pretty much all the land west of Texas after kicking Mexico's ass. I stated that we were justified in going to war because they were being disrespected, Mexico started the war, and Mexico wouldn't leave the United States alone. Now, like the first DBQ, I made a low B on the first submission. The first submission was sometime in late November. However, the redo was on December 1st, in which I made a high 8 on it. Now, in chemistry, we got the opportunity to participate in a really cool experiment. So my teacher was friends with many scientists from across the country. These scientists asked her if they can use us to help them do a study for something I forgot. Now, these scientists came from across the country, so you bet we had even more accents to make fun of. One scientist we didn't, since he was close by. I believe he was from Winston-Salem. The others we did. I believe one was from Des Moines, one was from Buffalo, and the other 2 were from LA. But they all got to make fun of us too for our southern accents, so we all got to join in on it. We all got to have some fun. Anyways, the first thing we did with them was an experiment that involved extracting strawberry DNA. However, it was that they first gave us a presentation on what we were doing in this experiment and what we were going to learn from it. I should go ahead and mention that we talked through this via Zoom, as since our school did not allow visitors, but it would also be kind of a pain in the ass for them to go all the way to Charlotte just for us. Anyways, after the presentation, they introduced us to the experiment. Then our teacher gave us materials and they guided us to the experiment. We could go up to our teacher's computer to ask questions, if we needed to, but the scientists were really good at explaining things, so not many questions were asked. Now, how about we talk about what we did in this particular experiment? So we first put a strawberry in a bag. Then we beat the ever-living shit out of that strawberry. We put the strawberry in the bag so that we could contain all the products while beating it up. Then we could put a coffee filter over a graduated cylinder, where we then poured out the beat-up strawberry. What happened here is that slowly, the juice from the strawberry was filtering through while the solid particles were staying in the filter. We waited for a bit until there was enough juice. We then put a little bit of ethanol solution into the graduated cylinder. This caused the cells to pretty much explode, which resulted in the DNA of the strawberry flying out everywhere in the graduated cylinder. We then got some really tiny plastic containers to fit a little bit of the DNA in to take home with us. I actually still have these containers with me today for some reason, but it's still cool we got to do this. Now, the next day, our teacher didn't discuss this experiment with us. She stated that we were going to have to write a lab report. Nah, she was just joking around with us. The reason is because our biology teacher in sophomore year made us write a ton of lab reports, if you recall from Storytime 33. However, we still had a project to go along with this experiment. So this experiment was an infographic. We simply had to talk about DNA, as that's what this experiment was all about. We also talked about the steps of the experiment. I don't seem to have any surviving footage of this experiment, but I do remember it being pretty bland for an infographic, but I still managed to make a 96 from it. Speaking of infographics, we also worked on an infographic project for American history. So the point of this project was to connect all the events we talked about throughout the class into one. We were each assigned a different topic to do an infographic on. I was assigned the War of 1812. There is way too much information on the War of 1812 to fit on just 1.5 by 8.5 by 11 inch infographic. As a result, my infographic was 4 pages long. Like the chemistry infographic, it too was kind of bland. However, it seemed like American history teacher was more strict in terms of grading, as it gave me an 88 for this, which honestly, I deserved it. I should have just condensed everything in one page to make it look more visually attractive. So, now let's talk about what I wrote for writing. This paper was written on November 9th. The prompt for this was, "What's so funny?" where we were supposed to find a humorous pieces of media and explain why they are funny. I chose to use memes from 3 movies and TV shows. The first one I mentioned was Elmo snorting crack cocaine. The second one I mentioned was from Titanic, where 101-year-old Rose says, "He exists only in my memory." The third one I used was Gru's plan, where he talks about stealing the moon and then putting the moon in his toilet. After explaining each meme, I wanted to detail on why these memes were funny. I explained that the reason these are funny is because they weren't necessarily the director's intentions to be funny, except Gru's plan, but the other 2 really weren't. Then I had to explain how this humor represents the meme community. I explained that it demonstrates how the meme community pays attention to these types of things. This was a really fun paper to write, as I'm cultured in memes. This is pretty much my playground. Now, for the sixth writing assignment, the prompt was, what do they mean? For this paper, we had to analyze an article. I chose to analyze an article from Newsweek discussed free speech problems in France. I gave examples and mentioned in the article about what is going on in France and the concerns drawn from it. It's a rather forgettable and pretty boring paper to read, so I'm not going to go into detail over it. I wrote this paper a little bit early though. I wrote it on November 18th. So that's all I got for November. Let's move on to December. Contrary to the previous few months, there was a lot that happened in December. December is always a crazy month, so this isn't much of a surprise. So first, let's talk about American history. So my grade was at stake. I was sitting at an 89. Fortunately, we had one more project that could make or break an A. We were talking about closing the West, which was when everyone started moving out west and a little bit after the Renaissance. Or not Renaissance, Reconstruction. I'm not sure why I read Renaissance. It was between 1880 to 1900. For this project, we had to do a silhouette from pretty much any topic from closing the West. On the silhouette, we had to include a primary source from that time period that included the author. I chose to do mine on cattle ranching. I used a silhouette of a cattle and I included an excerpt from some book by President Theodore Roosevelt that I forgot the name of. Now, as mentioned earlier, we could use as many attempts as we'd like on these. I had a total of 2 attempts. The first attempt was an 88. The reason is simply because I didn't write the author's name that clearly, so I fixed that up and my grade stood at a 94 for this project. As a result, I made an A in this class. This was really close call, as the second attempt was submitted the day grades were due, so I got really lucky. Now in chemistry, we did another experiment with our scientists. This experiment involved us learning about bacteria. To exemplify this, we used moldy bread. We then given a wet paper towel. Afterwards, we rubbed our loaf of bread all over that table so that we could pick up bacteria. Afterwards, we put our bread in a plastic bag with the wet paper towel. Then we just let this bread sit for a few months. I'll discuss what happens in March, as that's when we return to this experiment. Also in chemistry, our final assignment for the semester was on robotics. We spent 2 days working with robots. This was really hard to do. Like, I remember trying to build something and oh god, I could barely pass step 5. But we also had a discussion board for it too. But I didn't do the discussion board. The reason is because after calculating my weighted mean both with the discussion board done or not, I determined that it would not have no effect on my grade. I had a 97 in chemistry, and I would keep it 97 regardless if I'd done it or not. My teacher actually asked me why I didn't do it, and I just simply showed her my math. In all honesty, I probably have done more work calculating my hypothetical grades than actually doing the discussion board. But I mean, I'm much better at math than I am at socializing, so it kind of makes sense why I chose to calculate grades over actually doing the discussion board. Now let's discuss Spanish. So this would be when our professor decided to switch up how the assignments worked. Before this, we had multiple quizzes that we could retake as many times as we'd like. These really benefited me and helped me learn each topic. However, this new system involved us having a new program that just sucked. It was really confusing and I never learned anything. Not only that, but we had like 30 of these every module. We only had like 5 quizzes each chapter, so this sucked. Unfortunately, as we're going to see next semester, this program would also be used throughout Spanish 2, which made Spanish 2 really bad, as well as another circumstance to talk about later on. The same case would also be done for the labs, but unlike how we previously did the Spanish lab, I actually really like this format better. Instead of doing long-ass presentations and discussion boards, this was much more fun and more for us to learn about the culture of the Spanish-speaking world. We got to learn about every Spanish-speaking country, different traditions, and different tourist spots in these countries. This was really cool, although most of this I knew since I have a pretty extensive knowledge of geography, but it was still fun. So then we had our final exams. Even though all final exams were waived for high school courses, we still had finals for college courses since those weren't standardized tests. The final itself was super easy. For Spanish, it was super easy. I made a 98 on it. However, that's not what was memorable. So after taking a 98 on it, I texted mom letting her know what I made, and then she sent me a video of her students all shouting, "Nice job, Zach!" This was really cool, and put me in an even better mood than I already was. Now let's talk about writing. So we only had one writing assignment in December. Glaringly, this was also the last thing we did for this course. Our prompt for this paper was, why should I trust this? In this paper, we had to pick up an article and analyze it and determine if it was trustable. I'm not going to mention mine, since it was kind of political, but I will say it was kind of similar to writing assignment 6. And then we officially reached Christmas break. So unlike most school years, this Christmas break was actually very eventful. So to start, let's talk about how a law passed by Congress affected my YouTube channel. So Congress passed the coronavirus relief package, which granted $600 to individuals. But like everything done in Congress, there was even more bogus shit in this package that doesn't pertain at all to coronavirus. One such piece was extensive copyright laws where offenders could actually face prison time. As a result, I got really scared that some of my videos might have been copyrighted stuff on them, so I privated all my videos. Although I will mention I didn't really have to do this, as ex post facto laws still exist. Now, in all reality, I really didn't need to do this. The reason is because this bill was probably the weakest piece of legislation ever passed by Congress. Pretty much everyone that is not an elite opposes this bill, and therefore nobody has been arrested or even suspected of it, since the overwhelmingly majority of law enforcement and judicial executives won't even hear it. I mean, come on, our government seriously thinks that copyright should result in a longer sentence than freaking armed robbery. That's absolutely stupid. However, I also had other personal reasons why I wanted to private my stuff. I uploaded a lot of cringy content back in the day. Like, some videos are nostalgic for me to watch back, while others I don't even know why I made them. So it was good that now nobody could see them. Now, none of my videos are private anymore. Instead, they are all unlisted, meaning you need a link. The reason I changed this was so that I could see old comments and analytics for research purposes. So then, what was next for my channel? Well, on Christmas Eve, I released a YouTube announcement video. I announced that I would begin a new series called Storytime. This is where I pretty much talk about my past as well as experiences with different stuff. A Storytime would be released every Friday unless otherwise notified. The Storytime you are watching right now is the 37th edition of the series. Now, initially, I didn't think Storytime would be something that I would be super dedicated to. I initially thought it would just be simple videos. Turns out they became far more complex. Instead of talking about individual stories in each Storytime, I talk about multiple different stories that all seem to relate to this. So how does this relate to my junior year? Well, each Storytime has a script. The shortest Storytime script was 1,151 words, while the longest one was, is the script for this video, which is over 34,000 words long. Prior to Storytime, the longest thing I ever written was my semester project in Intro to Film back in freshman year, in which I had to do a 4,000 word in-depth film review on Titanic. So now not only was I consistently breaking my length record, but I was also getting experience. Also, writing is pretty much any activity. The more you do it, the better you get at it. Therefore, because I began writing so much, I began getting better at writing. In fact, just 10 months after beginning Storytime, I've already improved my writing style so much to the point that my writing style back in January isn't even like it is today. This experience, as you can expect, would greatly impact school, as will see me writing quite a lot in the second semester of junior year. Now, the next day was of course Christmas, so even though it was 2020 and during everything was happening, this Christmas was still a good Christmas. I got a new phone, the iPhone XR. My previous phone was a 6, so I jumped like 5 generations. I also got a few other presents too. Now the next day I woke up at like 4:30 in the morning. Me, my sister, and dad went to Delaware that day to visit family. Mom didn't join us. It wasn't too memorable of a trip though, as all we did was hang out at their house. So then we got home on December 29th. That night was a little weird though, so I went to Walmart to buy a gift card to put money on my phone, but when I was trying to drive out, my truck wouldn't turn. When I tried to turn it, my truck made a super squeaky noise, so I had to call dad to come look at it. Turns out the steering fluid had leaked, therefore I wouldn't have my truck back for another week. I drove dad's car while he drove my truck home, although I have no idea how he managed to make turns with that thing. And finally we reached 2021. Finally, we are over with 2020. That was one hell of a year if I say so myself. 2021 has honestly been only slightly better, but at least it ain't 2020 anymore. So now, since it is a new year, that means we are in the second semester now. This also means that I have new classes as well. However, my class order was switched, so now my first class today was chemistry, then came seminar, lunch, and crew, and then American history. For fourth block, I also had English, and then on Mondays I had study hall, while on Tuesdays I had a college class that I'll get more into later on. So let's talk about the new high school course, English. So this is also known as American Lit, but I'll refer to it as English since it's easier to say. When I do my senior year Storytime this December, I'll actually be referring to my high school English course as British Lit since I'm taking a college English course alongside it, but you'll have to wait until December to see that. Anyways, the teacher for this course was the same teacher I had for 9th grade English, as well as my crew leader, so I'll just refer to her as my English teacher now instead of crew leader to make things more simple. Anyways, if you remember from Storytime 30, we did not get along at first. We argued a ton, mostly because I was just being a dumbass. However, after finally fixing up myself in March, we got along, and since then we have had a really good relationship, so I was excited to have her as my teacher again. Now, unlike my first semester, college didn't start until later. It actually wouldn't be until January 11th, which was a week away, so Monday and Tuesday were both early release days. However, I had to be released at 1 o'clock on Monday because I had a dentist appointment, so the early release really only applied to Tuesday. So then let's move on to next week. So this would be when college started back up. Now, this is only a college course that was meant to be taken seated and are not because, but it's not because of COVID. College courses planned to be taken online wouldn't begin for another 2 weeks. So I had only one college course meant to be taken online. This was trigonometry. Now, as most of y'all know, math is my best subject. However, trigonometry is actually my best topic in math. So you bet that this course was not only easy, but it was also really fun. Now, I was one of only 2 juniors who took trigonometry. Trigonometry is the highest level math course our school lets us take. It's required if you plan to get an associate in science. It's not if we plan to get an associate of arts. I'm on the associates in science plan, so I needed this course. Now, if you remember from Storytime 33, I struggled in pre-calc. However, I had the same professor for trig that I had for pre-calc. This was a good thing, because now I knew her style. As a result, I would do far better in trigonometry than in pre-calc, alongside of course trigonometry being my best math. Now, the math course taken prior to this course is pre-calc. I took pre-calc as a sophomore. I had already finished all my high school math requirements in freshman year, so I was really far ahead. As we'll see later, this would result in something super significant happening. So now I'll talk a little bit about high school. So in mid-January, we did our final experiment with a scientist. However, this wouldn't be the last we heard from the scientist, which that would actually come in March. But this was our final experiment with them. So for this experiment, we once again looked at bacteria. We wanted to determine just how easily bacteria spreads. So for this experiment, we were each given a circular Petri dish. We then split the Petri dish into 4 equal sections. Then we took a stick and wiped it over the different surfaces. We got to choose which surfaces we wanted to do. I chose to do my phone, the sink, my table, and the doorknob. Then we would let them sit in Petri dishes until March. During these 2 months, this was going to pick up a shit ton of bacteria, as we'll see in March. Now let's move on to seminar. So in seminar, we began our new topic. All we had to do in seminar up to this point was the college video in August, but now we were working on something new. So we were originally going to go to the Biltmore house. However, that got canceled. So instead, we just got a lecture on financial literacy. So as you could probably guess, we were going to talk about financial literacy. To accompany this, we took a financial literacy course through Foundations Digital. This is a program by Dave Ramsey that pretty much teaches high school students personal finance. I learned quite a lot from it, although most of this information I already knew, such as how insane mutual funds are, as well as retirement planning and all that. Now, unlike the college video project, this would be a lasting study. This will last all the way through May. I also just want to mention Dave Ramsey in general. So we memed this guy so much throughout the semester. One of the biggest memes was how we said him. We always made kind of a voice when saying his name. So instead of saying Dave Ramsey, we would say Dave Ramsey. Another thing to mention about Dave Ramsey is that he was actually being sued during this time. So Ramsey is a super religious dude. So if he hears that you had sex outside marriage, then he's probably not even going to associate with you. That's what happened with the woman who worked for him. So she got pregnant without being married, and so Ramsey fired her. I mean, I don't think sex outside marriage is okay either, but damn, that's kind of excessive. So then the lady sued him. Now, while I personally think it's morally wrong to do that, Ramsey didn't break any laws. In the state of Tennessee, an employer can fire anyone with or without reason. So Ramsey is allowed to do that. Of course, the media then portrayed it like he was a religious cult leader, which simply isn't true, but it still wasn't moral to fire her for that. So as you can expect, this was a pretty big topic of discussion during pretty much every day in seminar. It also, of course, involves sex, so everyone wants to talk about it. Now, since seminar was a pass or fail course, all we had to do was just simply do the quizzes on Foundations Digital, and we got a pass. So let's discuss American history. So we are now officially in American History 2. This class goes from closing the West to 9/11 to the presidency of George W. Bush. Now, although we already did a project related to it, we did another project regarding closing the West. This was a really big project too. It was so big that we were given 2 weeks to work on it rather than 1. So this was a closing the West mural. We had to incorporate at least 10 topics from the Closing the West and include it all on one full sheet of poster board. As you can expect, this was an art project. I've already established the fact that I am an awful artist, so I was really scared about this. But I still tried. I did 2 rough drafts before doing the real thing. After my second draft, I determined what I needed to include and how I wanted to incorporate each topic to make them all fit onto one piece. On Thursday, January 21st, I got to work. I worked for a total of 6.5 hours on this project. And believe me, when I finished this monster of a project, I was so relieved. It was actually due on January 22nd, but I got it done a little bit early just because I was so motivated to finish it. The final product had multiple elements relating to the topic. It included mountains, a railroad, a bull, a wagon, a cross to represent Mormonism on the wagon, farms, teepees to represent the Indian Wars, and even more topics I don't remember. I colored the entire poster with markers, which was really difficult. I also managed to teach myself how to draw a bull that actually looks really good. Like, that bull is probably the best thing I think I've ever drawn, but overall, this mural looked really good. The hard work paid off in the end. I've been a 94 on it, although in all honesty, I think I deserved a 100 just because of how much time and effort I forked into this project, but an A is an A, so it's all good. So now I want to mention the next day, being January 22nd. This day was kind of like a reward for doing all that hard work from the day prior. So during this time, me and my sister used to visit our grandmother regularly every Friday. She lives in Asheville, which is about an hour and a half away, although on occasion it can be up to 2 hours since Asheville traffic can be really bad on occasion. And then Charlotte traffic is just a complete nightmare. However, the night before at cheer practice, my sister sprained her knee, so she was at the doctor. Therefore, I went to my grandmother's house by myself. The ride up there was amazing. Driving through the mountains is already awesome enough, but literally the only cars that I saw were when I took off and when I reached Asheville. This was both on the way up there and back. It was also very warm for January, so warm in fact that I was able to roll down my truck's windows and enjoy the view. When I got there, me and my grandmother got pizza. Afterwards, we talked for a little bit and then I headed back out. As mentioned, the ride back was just as great as the ride up there. But that wasn't all. That night, I had to take my sister for her friend's house. She had a friend who lives about 35 minutes away, so I took her over there. Kinda weird for her to go to her friend's house in a boot, but I mean, I did D-Now 2018 with 2 broken arms, so I can't say shit. Now, afterwards, I drove myself home. Before going home, I called in a takeout order and picked it up. Dad actually told me that I could use the credit card for it, but I declined and just used my own money instead. Now, it might seem like not seem like much, but believe me, driving by yourself is really fun, especially if you live somewhere with a variety of different environments like I do. North Carolina has pretty much everything. We got Charlotte, Raleigh, and Greensboro for big cities. Our west part is where all the mountains are, and then our coast is on the east. It really is a great state to live in, no matter what environment you like. Anyways, let's go back to school. Let's talk about English. So as mentioned earlier, I had a dentist appointment the first day back. Therefore, I missed English that day. Apparently, we were assigned a paper to write about and how our year has been and what we can learn from it. Ironically, Storytime 1, which was released on January 1st, was actually about how 2020 went for me. So I pretty much already could determine what I needed to write. However, I didn't know this, so I then checked on Thursday and then saw this assignment. Not only that, but it was due Wednesday. I quickly emailed my teacher about it. She worked with me over it. What I mean work with me is that she just waived it for me, which I'm glad, because I did not want my first grade to be in this class to be a 0, so I got really lucky with that. Now also that month, we began our first book. We read The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch. Pausch was a computer science professor at Carnegie Mellon University. He had a great life. He was making 6 figures, had a great wife, had 3 kids. He was pretty much set. However, at only 47 years old, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and he only had 6 months to live. So this inspired him to do a last lecture to students and faculty at his school, where he went over different life lessons he's learned throughout the years and different stories that happened to him throughout his life. This book is his last lecture. This was a great book. I really love this book because even though it's a very sad book, it has so many funny moments. Probably my favorite part in the whole book was when he was taking his niece and nephew out in his brand new car. Their parents told him not to spill their drinks in Pausch's car. After the parents went away, Pausch then picked up his soda, held it upside down, and then spilled it all over his car. He did this in order to teach the kids that material things in the long run are not significant. Ironically, his nephew would go on to throw up in the car, and he didn't feel bad after seeing what his uncle did. So this was a fun book to read for the class as well. Alongside the book, we had a packet that included questions for each chapter. However, these weren't your normal spit out information type questions. These were more personal questions that ask us to connect. The reason our teacher gave us these types of questions was because the point of the book is to connect what Pausch is saying to your own life. This packet was just simply a guide to us doing that. The best part about this packet, though, was alongside it, I was just beginning Storytime. Like, the day we were assigned this packet, I believe I was working on Storytime 4. We would work on this packet all the way through early March, so up to September 10th. As you can probably guess, this book inspired a lot of information put into early Storytimes. Like, I remember writing Storytime 7, which was the original Fuge Storytime. I directly copy and pasted answers from my packet onto the Storytime. I also did the same thing on my packet. I copy and pasted stuff from Storytime onto my packet. This worked out extremely well, as I ended up making 100 on the packet. So now, let's move on to online college courses. So first up is Spanish 2 and Spanish Lab 2. This is pretty much the same deal as Spanish 1. However, I had trigonometry on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which was supposed to be seated but wasn't because of coronavirus. Therefore, I had to take Spanish online. This really sucked. Not only did I not make fun of my professor's northern accent, but I also couldn't necessarily learn as well. It was also with the new system we started using it in December, so that made it all more tedious. However, it did have some positives. One positive is that according to my classmates, who were of course taking Spanish in person, she was starting to make tests and speaking questions done in class. Meanwhile, I did these from the comfort of my own home. I also had to just record myself doing the speaking questions, meaning I could use as many attempts as I needed for the speaking questions, so it wasn't terribly bad. Now that's both Spanish 2 and the lab. What about the final course? That was ethics. Now this will probably be the course that I talk about the least, since not only is it kind of forgettable, but pretty much everything we did involved politics. Like we discussed things like abortion, gay rights, environmental issues, and all that other stuff. I have my own personal opinions on all these topics, but I know that many of y'all might have conflicting viewpoints, so I'm not going to discuss this class much. I also want to mention that we wrote 3 papers. Each one was about an ethical issue. I had to pick a side and argue pretty much in favor of it in a 5-paragraph essay. And all I'm going to say is that the first paper was in February, it was about abortion. The second paper was in March, it was about race and ethnicity. And the third was in April, and it was about poverty. Time to take a soda break. So that's all I got for January. Let's move on to February. So this month is the final non-eventful month of junior year. Not a whole lot happened this month, but there were a couple notable things. This would also be the month I took the second of the 3 college entrance exams. But before I mention that, I want to talk about college. So college officially went back in person this month. This meant that now I actually had to drive to school just to go to trigonometry on Thursdays, which isn't really a big deal. I needed the driving experience and trigonometry is fun. Then on Thursdays, I walked over to trigonometry, or Tuesdays. If it was on rainy days, I would drive over there. Later on, I'll be discussing an extreme case related to bad weather and going to trigonometry. So, let's talk about the college entrance exam I mentioned. This is the ACT. Every junior has to take the ACT, as the nation funds it for us. So the day we took the ACT was Tuesday, February 23rd. But since late January, our teachers have been preparing us non-stop for this test. Like, we temporarily stopped the Foundation's digital stuff in seminars so that we could do ACT prep. Now, how do we prepare? Well, firstly, we of course went back and looked at our pre-ACT. I made a 21 on it. I know what I needed to work on from the test. We also took a practice test and seminar. Every Monday we did one part of the test, and then Tuesday would be when we looked over it. We also had a different teacher be there to help us on Tuesday for each part. Like for the English section, we had our 10th grade, as well as current 12th grade English teacher help us out. Then for the math section, our 10th grade math teacher, not the one that got arrested, the one that got a spot, came over. The reading section was looked over by our American history teacher, and the science was looked over by our chemistry teacher. I also want to mention that looking over the math section, so I was known for being the best at math in all of Cohort A. Therefore, if the 10th grade math teacher wasn't available or didn't quite understand something, I would be the one called. I would then help whoever needed help and pretty much tell them how to do the math and guide them step by step. I helped a few people do this, and wow, it is so satisfying to help other people. Like, the feeling is so awesome, knowing you helped someone who was stuck on something. The best part is that I had that feeling a ton throughout the time, so life was great. Our English teacher also held an ACT class for us every day on Tuesday and Thursday after school. She actually works for the ACT, so she had some great tips for us. Now, Tuesday and Thursday would discuss the same topic. However, since I was already at school for trigonometry, I just simply decided to go to the ACT class on Thursdays. There's nothing wrong with extra practice. I also had many Cohort B friends who attended this class, so it was just nice to see them too. So then let's move on to February 23rd, the day we took the ACT. Now, school was remote for everyone that day except juniors, since we were taking the ACT. I was pumped for this test. I ate a pretty large breakfast and I was ready to give it my best. So first off, how is the ACT structured? Well, it has 4 sections: English, Math, Reading, and Science. This is a very fast-paced test. That's what I struggle with. I'm not good at fast pacing. I'm better at critical thinking. We'll see later on how that absolutely destroyed me later on. For now, let's dissect the ACT. So the first part of the test is English. This is grammar. I'm pretty good at grammar. Glaringly, it comes from writing, but I also learned many grammar rules from English back in 10th grade, as our teacher taught us grammar. Even though it was 75 questions in just 45 minutes, it was in my opinion the easiest section on the test, mostly because it came first and I had like 5 minutes to look over my answers. Now, the next section is math. So you might think that this is going to be complicated math, such as what I'm learning in trigonometry or even stuff calculus 3 or something. No, it was even harder than that. It was middle school math. You might be thinking, what? That's not hard at all. Well, it is when you haven't used it in 4 years. That's the difficult part about this test. A middle schooler can probably score really high on this section just because most of the math is stuff from 7th and 8th grade. But we're juniors. We haven't seen this math in years. And then it's frustrating getting them wrong simply because you haven't used the math in a while. One example of this would be equations of circles. The last time I had ever seen an equation of a circle was in Algebra 2 back in January 2019. I have a good memory, but my memory isn't that good. And plus, we only spent a single day talking about this, so 9th grade me really only thought it was minor and I wouldn't use it again. Too bad this question screwed me over. The math section is also the longest section of the test. Even though it's only 60 questions long, you get an hour to do it, which is a 33% increase from the English section. The next section is reading. So every reading section always has 4 passages, each with 10 questions. The passages are all different subjects, but they always appear in the same sequence. The first is fiction, the second is social sciences, the third is humanities, and the fourth is natural sciences. My best one is social sciences, my worst one is humanities. My second best is natural science, so therefore, I always started out with social sciences, then moved to natural sciences, then fiction, and then finally humanities. Now, the passages I got were super boring. Like, the practice ACTs were not even this boring. Normally, I read a history or current events passage for social science. This ACT gave me something that's really similar to humanities. Then for natural sciences, I got a really confusing passage about some topic from biology. My fiction one was also sucked. And then I don't even know what I got for humanities because I only had a minute left when I reached humanities. So for it, I had to bubble in random answers. Now, the hardest part about the reading section is the time. This is by far the most time-restraining section of the test. You have 35 minutes to read 4 passages and answer 40 questions. That is ridiculous. I have no idea how people manage to get perfect scores on this section without guessing all the questions or getting super lucky and getting all of them right. Like, this section is insane. The worst part about it is that that's only the second hardest part of the whole test. The hardest part is saved for last, that being the science section. So this is not your normal science test. This is a science test created by someone who is high on crack cocaine. Instead of asking you actual science questions, it gives you charts and graphs that pretty much only scientists seem to understand. All of this for high schoolers. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Now, the actual reason as to why they structured a science test in this way is to do with the standards across the nation. You have to remember that every junior in the entire nation is taking it. Each state has their own course requirements. For example, here in North Carolina, we're required to take Earth Environmental Science. In South Carolina, that's not required. In California, physics is required. Physics is not required in any of the Carolinas, so therefore, the test makers had to make a science test that could be for all states, so they had to resort to doing charts and graphs, which definitely complicates things a ton, and to top it all off, you have 35 minutes to answer 40 questions. Yeah, the science section is also a time cruncher, but not as much as the reading section, mostly because all you're doing is going back to a figure or a table. It's not like you are reading a passage. So after the science section, I was exhausted, but fortunately, that was it. The ACT was done. Our school provided us with a personal pizza and a soda to take home, so that was really nice. However, I still had trigonometry that day, so I went. However, I actually didn't have to, as early college students didn't have to attend after taking the ACT, but I did it anyway even though I was so exhausted, but honestly, I shouldn't have. I almost fell asleep in that class. I also had a difficult time understanding really anything my professor said, but I was still stayed awake and got through it. Finally, when I got back home, I just laid around and did nothing the rest of the day. Our teachers also gave us no work that week to accompany this, so the rest of the week was easy. So how did I do on this test? Well, on my pre-ACT, I made a 21. On the real ACT, I made a 24. This was much better. As for section grades, I made a 24 on English, 26 on math, 22 on both reading and science. I definitely saw myself making the grades on English and math, as I was pretty confident about both of those, but reading and science, I thought I was going to make a 17 on those. I really did not expect to make a 22 on them. Funnily enough, this test was pretty much became obsolete in March, not because I took the ACT again, but because I took a different college entrance exam that was much more catered toward my critical thinking ability rather than pacing. I'll discuss it when we get there. So how about we revisit Storytime for a minute? So at this point, I had released 8 Storytimes and was about to release my 9th. My classmates all knew about my YouTube channel, and they all watch Storytime. They really like the series since we share so much of the stuff I talk about. They also get to learn things about me that they never would have known about. That's the beauty of Storytime. As stated earlier, I'm extremely introverted, so if someone wants to learn about me, I just have to tell them to watch Storytime and bam, I don't have to explain stuff on the spot. It works out great. And by the way, I never actually introduced Storytime to my classmates. They all have known about my YouTube channel since freshman year, so this wasn't anything new. So now, how about we talk about different things that happen in my classes? Firstly, let's talk about chemistry. So throughout the month of February, we got to interview different scientists in different fields of study. So remember how I said that my chemistry teacher knew scientists from across the country? Well, I want to take that back. She knew scientists from across the entire world. Like, we talked with the scientists from Hong Kong, one from Canada, one from Spain, and even one from Japan. We also talked with the local scientists from Raleigh. This was really cool getting to learn about them and what they study. It's also interesting to learn about how they study things, because in different countries, they sometimes use different processes to conduct experiments. So that was really cool. Then in American history, we did 2 mini projects. The first project was about the Spanish-American War. This is when we went to war with Spain over the USS Maine, which was sunk while in Cuba in 1898. We won and ended up taking Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam. So for this project, we worked in a group of 5 and had to create a newspaper headline that included pictures of a Google drawing. We had to determine who was at blame, as the media had a ton of influence in regards to this war. We chose to put the blame on the Cuban revolutionaries. We then wrote a paragraph explaining why. Now, I don't exactly remember this the best, as I really didn't do anything, but that's not because I was lazy. We actually had a girl in our group let me repeat that. We actually had a girl in our group work on the whole project for the group on Tuesday night. We didn't force her to. She literally volunteered to do it herself. Therefore, the rest of us didn't have to do anything but submit it. We all made a 100 too. So this girl is an absolute legend. She'll be mentioned in March for another American History project. Now let's move on to another American History project. So this was an individual project. We were discussing political corruption back in the 1900s. So we had to create a poster that dealt with political corruptions. Now, I don't remember mine too well, since this was after all a mini project, but I believe I picked a piece up by some notable person during this time and wrote about voter fraud going on in Philadelphia. I believe I drew a ballot with the excerpt on it. I did include a city skyline in the background. It wasn't anything too special, although I worked for like 3 hours on it. I believe I made a 95 or something on that project. Finally, before I wrap up February, I want to touch on English. So this would be when we finish reading the last lecture. Our final assignment for it was to present our dreams to our class. I did this in just one night, as all I had to do was write a script and screen record me talking with the Google Slides up. So I did that. Now, we did not have to write a script, but I did it anyway so I wouldn't lose my place. While unforgettable, it was a success. So then we can move on to March. So March 2021 was a super chaotic month. It and May both had a ton of stuff happen. So to start, I'll talk about Storytime 10. So this was about my 8th grade school year. 8th grade was a very difficult school year, as I already kind of explained earlier in the Storytime. However, this Storytime is significant not just because it discusses 8th grade, but because of its length. The script for this Storytime was well over 19,000 words on 43 pages. At the time, this was an insane length. The previous record holder was Storytime 2, only clocking in at about 7,800 words. Storytime 10 would actually hold the spots for the longest thing I ever wrote for about 2.5 months. This was when the original junior year Storytime ever took with a word count for about 24,000 words. So you bet I was really happy to release my longest and best work. The Storytime itself was an hour and 36 minutes long too, so this was a milestone achievement for me. Even though that's still a lot to my standards today, it's not as crazy. Currently, the record stands at a little over 34,000 words, that being this Storytime that I'm doing right now. I'm also going to go ahead and mention American history. So we were talking about World War I. We were also assigned a major project to go along with it. This was a group project too. What we had to do was that we had to do a podcast on our assigned topic from World War II. We had to write the script and then we would record it together. How we would record it though would be that our teacher set up a Google Meet, where he would then record it and we would read off our script. He would then send us the video that we can all edit. So who was my group? Well, I was in a group with 2 girls. One of those girls was the same girl who did the entire Spanish-American War project in one night. The other was her best friend. Both of them are really smart, and of course I'm pretty smart too, so that means we're gonna do great. Our topic was on trench warfare, which is something we three had extensive knowledge over since all three of us had read All Quiet on the Western Front back in sophomore year. So then we got to work. We did a little bit of research for specific information and we worked on the script. We didn't do a whole lot on it, but we got some progress done. So that was on Tuesday, March 2nd. So the next day was a remote day, so I opened my computer to work on the script. When I opened it up, I noticed that the girl did the whole damn thing the night before. She did it again. The best part is that the script was clean and well written. The best part about it though was that she managed to incorporate hers, mine, and the other girl's personality. Like, my parts had a lot of energy and chaos. Her part had included a lot of fear, and the other girl's part involved a lot of comedy and interest in us two. That's just wow. Thank God I was in a group with her. She made my life so much easier. Now, all we had left was performing the script and editing the video. We practiced it throughout the week and the next. This project was due on Friday, March 12th, so we took our time. Now, we had a little bit of a dispute on when to record. The girls wanted to do it in the morning or early afternoon since they are both morning people. I wanted to do it at like 8 p.m. since I'm a night person. However, we compromised at 4:30 on Thursday, March 11th. We of course had school on Monday and Tuesday. All three of us went to church on Wednesday, although we all go to 3 different churches. Then we also had to include the fact that I had trigonometry from 2:30 to 3:45 on Thursday, not including driving time. So 4:30 worked perfectly, and so that's what we did. However, there was a pretty funny incident that happened before we began. So our teacher was on the Google Meet. He was letting his wife know not to bother him for the next 30 minutes. So that was when I decided to whip open Clash of Clans so I could do my war attacks. But the issue is that I left my phone at full volume unmuted. My Chromebook was also unmuted. So when I pulled up Clash of Clans, the girls, my teacher, and maybe his wife too all heard the Clash of Clans logo. The girls and the teacher started laughing. I laughed too, even though it kind of scared the shit out of me. Recording the podcast went great. We only had to re-record twice, but after that, we were successful. Now all that's left is editing. The editing was my job. However, there was an issue. I had the third and final college entrance exam on Saturday, March 13th. Therefore, I really wanted to spend the day studying and getting ready. So I told the girls about it, telling them that we would have to submit it late. There wasn't any late work penalty, but we three just don't like turning in late work, so that's why it mattered so much. So we notified our teacher about it. He was gracious and said that he would just get the technology person to edit it for us. He didn't wish me good luck on the test, and that was that. So that's another weight off my shoulder. In the end, we made a 94 on this. However, it was still successful, and it was fun too. Now, how about we discuss the college entrance exam? So this was the SAT. The SAT is very similar to the ACT, but it's also very different. It's still a test that tests you on English and math, and it's still time and you have to submit it to college. However, it's different in 3 different ways. The first is that I did not take this with my school. I actually signed up and took this test myself. Second, the SAT is much more critical thinking based and fast paced. Therefore, you are given much more time to think in depth about questions. Finally, the structure of the SAT is much different than that of the ACT. Like the ACT, I'll explain each section how they work. So let's start off with talk about getting to the test center and the process before taking a test. So the night before, I only stayed up to around 12 a.m. I normally stay up far later, but I wanted some rest. I had to be there at 8, so I woke up at 7:30. Mom made a huge breakfast for me. Then at 7:30, I headed out. So the test center I went to is the high school I would have gone to had I not gone to early college. It's only about 20 minutes away, so I arrived at around 7:50. It was Saturday morning, so I didn't have to deal with any traffic like I would any other day since everyone's trying to get to Uptown for work. I didn't see any familiar faces, which if you sell Storytime 10, that could be a good thing. I believe everyone I was taking the test with were seniors, as the SAT is generally taken in senior year, just I was taking it early so I could compare it to my ACT score much quicker. So then, it was time to take the SAT. So unlike the SAT has a very funky amount of questions. I believe it's also random, as I had a different number of questions and time on the PSAT than I did on the SAT, although that might have to be because it's a different test. However, you'll come to find that I actually found the SAT easier than the PSAT, which is definitely really strange. The first section was grammar. It's really the same deal as the ACT. Both tests seem to test students on the same grammar rules and sentence structure. Now, my state is known for doing extremely horribly on this section, as our state took grammar out of schools in 1997. Combine that with the fact that we're in the South, we screw up grammar all the time, we really suck at this section. I don't, at least since I'm pretty good at grammar as mentioned earlier, so this section wasn't as bad as it is for others. The second section was reading. Now, instead of having a rigid structure each and every time, the SAT is more variable in terms of number of passages and questions for each passage. However, these passages are oftentimes older passages. Like, I remember one of my passages being a speech by Frederick Douglass, who was an abolitionist during the early to mid-19th century. Of course, being from the 19th century, this speech involved weird wording as well as some pretty in-depth vocabulary, so it required more focus and attention. Both the grammar and reading sections combined for the composite English score. The third section was the calculator inactive math section, so the name speaks for itself. You have to do math without a calculator. This mostly includes math involving linear equations like slope-intercept formula and systems equations. It also included factoring, quadratics. It's also the shortest section of the test, being only like 15 minutes. The fourth section was the calculator active section, so this is where you can use a calculator. However, the SAT does not provide a calculator, so I had to bring one myself, but you are limited to what calculators you can use. For trigonometry, I used a TIE 84 graphic calculator, so this was allowed on the test, so I just used it. Our instructor also had brought some of her own calculators and gave them to anyone who needed them, so everyone had a calculator. Anyways, this section includes many nonlinear equation topics like cubic and quartic functions, logarithms, and trigonometry, stuff that pretty much requires a calculator basically. It was also the longest section of the test too, which made sense since you need the extra time to do harder math. I'm gonna take a soda break. Then the fifth and final section was a random section, where you pretty much do a mini version of the four sections mentioned. It was random which one you got. I was super lucky to get the calculator active section, so I breezed through this section. It was extremely easy too. Literally my first question was, what is 9 times 3? Like, wow, I thought this was a college entrance exam, not a 3rd grade math test. And so afterwards, we were finally done. That would be around 11:30, so I walked out, called in to take out order, went to the place to pick it up, and brought it home. Now, unlike the ACT, I was not tired at all after this test. The reason is because I knew that if I did shitty on it, I wouldn't have to worry about it. The 24 on my ACT is already good enough, so I had nothing to lose. However, I ended up doing far better on the SAT than the ACT, although I actually didn't get my results back until almost 2 weeks later, being March 26. I'll go ahead and talk about it so that I don't have to mention this topic again. So, I knew this would be when my results would come in, so I logged on to see what I made. I was shocked by what I made. I made a 1280. That's really good. My English score was a 620 and my math was a 660. This was actually so high that I scored in the top 10%. And note, I was younger than a large majority of test takers, so this was also something to brag about too, so I was really happy. Now, I actually ended up not needing to take the SAT or even the ACT because the UNC system has made test scores optional due to coronavirus, even for class of 2022. Most private colleges in the state are doing the same thing, so I didn't have to take them. However, the 1280 still looks really good on my application, so I still used my test scores when I applied. So now let's move on to Monday, March 15th. So on this day, both the high school and college counselors wanted to discuss with each junior and their parents about college or course schedule for senior year. They also wanted to do a quick follow-up on college grades. Dad joined this conference virtually, since he had to get on a call for work right after the meeting. Now, for college grade checkup, the only grade I had below an A was ethics, as my professor was very lazy. He had not graded anything since January, so I told my counselor about this, and she said that she'd get him and get his act together, which he did and started grading everything on time. So then how about we talk about the main focal point of this meeting, creating my senior schedule. The counselor purposely had my meeting be last because I had a very significant situation, so I was extremely far ahead in terms of classes. The reason stems all the way back to 8th grade. I took Algebra 1, World History, and Earth Environmental Science that year, all of which were high school courses. As a result, I was really far ahead. Because I was so far ahead, I took a bunch of college courses as substitutes, which resulted in me completing all of my elective hours after the first semester of sophomore year. Therefore, this gave me not just more time to take specific required courses, but also allowed me to work towards an extra certificate to graduate with. Combined with the fact that I took summer courses before junior year, I was really far ahead. So that's when the counselors proposed an idea. I could graduate in the fall rather than the spring. This meant that my workload would be a lot more for a quote-unquote senior semester. This also meant that I needed to immediately begin making decisions about college, since I would be going into the spring 2022 rather than fall 2022. I was up for it. Dad was up for it too. So we set my schedule to graduate early. However, I won't walk the stage until May, since the school didn't offer a fall graduation ceremony, but I have still received my diploma in all in December. So then after we agreed to the idea, we worked on the schedule. Seniors take 3 high school courses, being British Lit, Civics and Economics, and Seminar. Students will take British Lit and Civics at different times, and then Seminar is taken in the fall. However, because of my unique circumstances, I am taking both British Lit and Civics in the fall. This kind of started to meme throughout the grade, as I'm the only person graduating early. So everyone jokes about how I have Civics and British Lit and how I have British Lit and Civics. Now, for college, I only needed 3 more college courses to receive my associates in science. I needed to take research and development, or when I do my senior year story time, I refer to it as English, and physics 1 and 2. I would ultimately withdraw from physics as that class was literally impossible to pass, especially with an asshole professor and the pacing being faster than Antonio Brown. Instead, I'm taking biology 1 and 2. While biology sucks, the class is much easier and at a slower pace. However, I was also only 1 class away from receiving my Business and Administration certificate. This was the extra certificate I mentioned earlier. This course has 4 required courses. The first is Introduction to Business, which I took the 2nd semester of freshman year. The second is Principles of Marketing, which I took the 2nd semester of sophomore year. The third is Business Law, which I took the summer before junior year. The final one is Principles of Marketing, which I am currently taking right now in the senior semester. So they also added Principles of Marketing. So I'm of course a senior now, and these are my classes that I'm taking currently. So yeah, that hit me and Dad like a truck. We were thinking that I had a full year left, and now I don't even have 1 year left of school. We were flabbergasted, but honestly, this isn't very surprising. The best term that describes my academic career is early. I started preschool early, doing it at only 3 years old rather than at 4. I left all of my elementary school friends early when I transferred to a different district for 6th grade. I took high school classes early in 8th grade. Depression. I was too early in life to be suicidal. I was only 13 years old when I wanted to kill myself. Someone that young should not even know what suicide is, let alone actually want to do it. I would then go on to an early college, where I would get an associate's degree when I graduate high school, knocking 2 years of college early, and now graduating high school and college a semester early. I will also be graduating from university early and getting an accounting job before I even turn 20 years old. That's early. Early has defined my academic life. At times, a bad thing, but many times, a great thing. So then that was that. In my opinion, this was probably the second most important, or not second, this was probably the most important day of all of junior year. Every school year has a specific day that pretty much defines them. 6th grade had August 24th, 7th grade had May 12th, 8th grade had March 8th, 9th grade had August 11th, and 10th grade had March 15th. 11th grade, ironically, was also March 15th, and then 12th grade would probably be December 10th. I might one day release a story time where I discuss these days and why they are so important, although that will have to be after I graduate since I want to include senior year in it. So now let's move on from that. How about we talk about a class that I haven't mentioned since October, that being crew. So this is something that my school definitely could have done a lot better with. This was a crew project where each crew from each cohort had to create a TikTok video about a famous black person who pretty much uplifted the African American community. This was to celebrate Black History Month. Right off the bat, you could tell that there were some issues with this. First off, Black History Month is in February, not March. I think the reason we did it in March rather than February was because they probably came up with this idea in March. I guess they were really determined to do it. So they just did it in March. They should have just waited until February 2022, since that would actually make sense. Another issue is the use of the TikTok. Both me and the sophomores didn't use TikTok. In fact, we didn't even know what a talk tick or a tic tac even was at the time. Both of us had never even heard of TikTok. Therefore, nobody in our crew even knew what was going on. The school just made assumptions and didn't bother doing any research. But we weren't alone. Out of let's say 50 students between all crews in cohort A, only like 15% of students used TikTok. That's not exact, but it's just an educated guess since that's probably similar to the actual number. There's only about 8 students. Combine that with the fact that there were 10 crews. Even if there was only 1 TikTok user in each crew, 2 crews still did not have anyone who knew how to use TikTok, how TikTok worked, or in our case, had never even heard of it. And the chances of 8 crews each having a TikTok user is also rare. The average crew size is about 5 people, so therefore 1 out of 5 students use TikTok. Probability is my worst math, so I'm not going to bother calculating that, but I can guarantee you that number is pretty low. Of course, I don't have much of a say, even if I can prove mathematically why this was a bad idea, so we had to do it anyway. One person we had to do was Michael Jordan. In the TikTok, we had to list 10 facts about Jordan, but we also had to act them out. It was also had to include everyone in the crew, which wasn't a big deal since it was just me and the sophomore. We also did the research, which was super easy since literally everyone knows the basics about Jordan. Like, he's from Wilmington, he plays for the Chicago Bulls, and his number was 23, and he's a mama's boy. We knew that in one sitting, but the hard part was acting it out. We had to act out the stuff. But fortunately, we never finished this project. We were assigned it on March 15th, which I didn't attend since I had the meeting during that time. The next day is when we took all the notes and stuff. Then the next Monday, our English teacher was not there, as I believe she was doing some stuff with ACT. The next day, March 23rd, I was at the DMV and therefore missed school entirely. The next Monday, we didn't have school. That Tuesday, March 30th, our teacher wasn't there again, not sure why. So then the day she just emailed us letting us know that we won't have to do it since she wasn't available for most days, and then I had to miss a day too. We of course had a sub that Tuesday, so we just watched all the other crew's videos, and oh god, these were something. Both me and the sophomore sat beside each other cringing at those while roasting them. Probably the best line from us two watching these was that we were watching the 9th grade math teacher's crew. The sophomore said that the math teacher looked like John Green. I still find that one even funny 7 months later. Now, let's go back a little bit to March 13th. I said that I didn't go to school that day because I was at the DMV. What was that about? Well, I scheduled an appointment for that morning to get my full provisional license, meaning that I would get my restrictions removed on my license. So me and Dad went. However, I also had to take an eye exam. My eyesight was bad, and I hadn't gotten new glasses since freshman year, so I ended up failing the test. Therefore, I just spent the rest of the day at home working on schoolwork. Now, I did eventually get my full provisional, which wasn't until just about 2 weeks ago. Yeah, 2 weeks ago. Me and Dad did the same process, but apparently they were not actually supposed to do an eye exam, although they still checked my eyes again just to make sure things were okay, which they were. I did it perfectly since I now had new glasses. I got my full provisional license afterwards. Didn't even have to take a driving test, which is strange, but oh well. I'm a cautious driver. I know there are plenty of dumbasses on the road, and I know because I live in Charlotte. Charlotte drivers are stupid, especially on 85. Oh god, they do the dumbest shit on that interstate. But I also want to mention what happened at school on March 23rd that I unfortunately didn't get to participate in. So in chemistry, they apparently blew up 3 microwaves. I think they were working with packing peanuts or something, but damn, the one day I didn't go to school, this happens. Nobody even recorded it, so I didn't get to see what happened. All I got to see were the microwaves with a ton of packing peanut mix in them. Oh well, I at least got out doing the crew project, so I guess that equals out. Still really wish I got to blow up a microwave though. So now, how about we go back a little bit to academics? So firstly, how about I discuss American history? So we did a lecture on the Treaty of Versailles. This was a document that ended World War I. In it, the Allies, being the United States, Great Britain, France, and Italy, pretty much set some super serious rules as well as debt for Germany, as that's whom the blame was put on. We were each split into groups of 4, each representing an ally. I represented France. We had to pretty much create the Treaty of Versailles. We set the debt Germany would pay and the land they would have to give up. The others in my group didn't seem to want any money, so I had Germany pay pretty much their entire gross domestic product to me. Now they did, however, want land, so they took all the land. I got a little bit of the land from Africa, but that's all it took. Then each group announced their plan. At the end, our American history teacher shouted, "Congratulations!" and everyone cheered. He then said, "Y'all just started World War II." Then the class cheered even harder. "Let's go! We just started World War II. How about that?" Now, we also did our 3rd DBQ for American history. So this DBQ, as well as our 4th DBQ, was more factual DBQs. Unlike the 2nd DBQ where we took a side, we didn't take any sides for the next 2 DBQs. We just stated the facts by organizing main points in 5-paragraph papers, just like the 1st DBQ. So this DBQ's prompt was, what caused the Great Depression? I thought this was a really interesting DBQ to write, as although I knew pretty much everything about the Great Depression and how it devastated our economy and how it led to the events of World War II, I never really learned why it happened. I just simply thought it was a coincidence that the stock market crashed, but I learned from writing about this that the Great Depression was caused by consumers buying more than they could afford, the stock market crash, and the banks began closing. These were also my 3 points, so I definitely learned a lot from this. Unlike the previous 2 DBQs, I did not initially start out with the low B. I actually made a high A on the DBQ first try, and I think I know exactly why. Good old story time. At this point, I had done 13 story times, and in just that short time, my writing style was improving at an insane rate. So I was able to apply what I learned from story time to this, which is definitely really cool to think about. Now, as you can probably tell from that DBQ, we discussed the Roaring Twenties. This is a time period of economic growth and prosperity, as we were going through post-war economic growth since this was right after World War I. It was also an age of progressivism, as we saw a lot of things such as women getting the right to vote via the 19th Amendment. But there was also a lot of problems. Crime was insane, as the 18th Amendment caused crime to skyrocket. There's also a lot of corruption, especially during the Taft and Harding administration. So that's when in 1924, a man by the name of F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote a book that pretty much discusses living large amidst corruption. This book is called The Great Gatsby. We actually talked a little bit about this book and even read an excerpt from it in American history, as J. Gatsby represented the goods and bads of the Roaring Twenties very well. Now, why do I bring this book up in particular? Well, that brings us to English, because ironically enough, we read The Great Gatsby in English. This book was very difficult to read, and while it makes sense as it was written almost 100 years ago, so the wording as well as the time frame was a little bit foreign to me, so therefore I generally had to read each chapter more than once to understand. I also had to use Spark Notes a lot to understand symbols, as we read this book to study symbolism, since this book is packed with it. From things such as the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg to the Valley of Ashes, this book is an English teacher's paradise. And as most of y'all know, I am not an English person, so I had a hard time picking up on the symbolism. This book made this a very difficult book to read. But even though it was difficult, it was still a really fun read. This was just because it was its difficulty. The difficulty made it challenging. Challenges make one better at something. Oftentimes, obstacles are fun to overcome. The Great Gatsby is an example of a challenge. It was difficult for me, but I still enjoyed becoming a better reader from it. I just wanted to clarify the word challenge, as I notice many people mess it up. Challenge is the positive connotation for not easy, as it's a good thing. Now, I remember taking quizzes with The Great Gatsby, and I remember doing questions after reading, but there is one assignment in particular from The Great Gatsby that I remember very well. So this was a crossword puzzle. There were multiple clues related to the book, and we of course had to solve it. We did this on March 30th. I knew pretty much all the answers, as I challenged myself to get better from this, so I completed the puzzle in under 10 minutes. However, my friend Aaron, who you might remember from Storytime 33 as a student who told our seminar teacher to spread them cheeks, needed some help. But it wasn't just him. He and a group of 5 needed help too. So I guided them through the crossword. I didn't tell them the answers, but I told them where they can find the answers in the book, as well as gave them extra hints. As an example, one of the questions asked what state Nick is from. Nick is the main character, by the way. He is from the state of Minnesota. So instead of saying that he was from Minnesota, I told him that he was from the state whose largest city is Minneapolis, and its capital is St. Paul. I don't think any of them heard of St. Paul, but I knew they definitely knew about Minneapolis, especially due to the amount of news coverage that it got a few months prior. So they easily knew what state I was talking about. There was also a question asking where J. Gatsby was from. Gatsby is from North Dakota, and I'm the only person in the entire grade who knows that the capital city Bismarck and the largest city Fargo, since I know geography. So instead, I just said that Gatsby was from the same state Wiz Khalifa is from. That hint didn't help, as I just referenced the page number. By doing this, they were able to find where he was from by using the book, so I did Aaron and the rest of the group a huge favor. Now, in chemistry, we worked on 2 projects. The first was an individual project. For this project, we had to create our own superhero or villain that deals with a certain element. We had to describe their backstory, their personality, information about their element, and a picture of them. I've already discussed that I am a shitty artist, so I was really scared about this. But there was no need to be scared, as this was going to be a really fun project. So at the beginning of the story time, I stated that my favorite element is francium. So I of course decided to use francium in this scenario. I chose to do a villain. I named him Jean de Francium. As you can probably tell, he's French. He was born in 1917, but he and his family fled to avoid World War I. They weren't very enlightened, as they literally chose to move to the Soviet Union because communism! Hail Stalin! They moved to what is now modern-day Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is known for some rare ores. They have more uranium here than any other country in the world, so that interested John. The fast forward to 20 years, francium is discovered. The Soviet Union also worked with Nazi Germany during this time, as this was before Germany turned on the Soviet Union. So Jean went to France, which was under German control, kidnapped the scientist who discovered francium, and repeatedly tortured her and forced her to help create the francium materials that would benefit the Soviet Union. That was my backstory. There's more to it, but I don't want to bore y'all with historical fiction. Anyways, the project went smoothly. I surprisingly drew John very well. We also had to include a catchphrase. I really like the catchphrase I came up with being, "Are you ready to explode? 'Cause I am." I made 100 on this project. My teacher really liked all the historical context I gave as well as the concepts I came up with for the villain. This is a really fun project to do, so that 100 was definitely deserved. Now, the other project I want to mention in regards to chemistry is a group project. So we finished our units on mixtures. So we were paired up with a group of 3 to do a mind map. A mind map is where we pretty much organize information through headlines and subheadings in a rather creative way. I know it might sound confusing at first, but as I progress in discussing it, you'll understand much better what we are doing it. So I was paired up with 2 girls. One of those girls just happened to be the same girl who did group projects in One Night in American History. Unfortunately, she would not do the same on this, but she was still a reliable person to work with. The other girl was a girl who, let's just say, is going to be the focal point of an extremely heated discussion when I talk about May. So our idea for this poster was to create a weather-themed mind map. For this, we wrote the title of the project in the sun. Then underneath the sun were clouds. Each cloud represented a subheading. Then each cloud would spell out any given information, giving out any form of precipitation to represent the topics under the subheadings. As an example, we included one cloud dedicated to separating mixtures. We then included raindrops coming out of it, each drop representing a way to separate mixtures. We did this with 5 clouds, each with about 10 topics, so 50 topics total. Yeah, this was a big project. And like all big projects, this went by pretty slowly. In fact, it wouldn't be until late April when we finished. Sometime in late April, I decided that I was going to take matters into my own hands and finish it myself. And that's what I did. I colored the background and pasted the remaining topics. And when we were finished, we made a 96 on it, and we were like a whole month late, but still got it done. One final thing to mention in chemistry was talking with the scientists from earlier. Now that it had been 2 months since we did the bacteria experiment, 3 months since the bread experiment, it was time to look over our stuff, and holy shit, these things were nasty. So much bacteria had grown in my petri dish and my bread was super moldy. The scientists then took a screenshot that included them and the whole class to include in their study. Then they said goodbye, and that was the last we ever heard from the scientists. So then let's talk about spring break. Our last day of school was March 30th. Spring break would last for almost 2 weeks. We wouldn't go back to school until April 12th. So now we were in April. April was also a very eventful month. Definitely not as eventful as March was, but still a lot went on. So I'm gonna take a soda break. Alright. Now probably the biggest event from this month was when the school district announced that they were going to combine cohorts A and B. For the first time, for the first 2 weeks, being April 12th and 23rd, we would go Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Then after 2 weeks, we would begin going back on Wednesday. So let's talk about returning back. So of course the first day back was April 12th. So in chemistry, we got new tables since we now had cohort B with us. I was with 2 people from cohort B at my table. Now we did not go to seminar. Instead we went to crew. Now that we were back together, both cohort A crew and cohort B crew were combined. As a result, we now had about 5 freshmen, 6 sophomores, and only 1 junior, being me of course. Therefore, I pretty much was the leader of the crew since I was the oldest in my group. Of course my English teacher was still the crew leader, but I served more as a student leader. So since we pretty much had a full-size crew, we could do normal activities now. This would prove to not be a good thing, which you'll see why. So, the first thing we did was introduce ourselves. I started out since I was the leader, and then everyone else took turns introducing themselves. Afterwards, it was time to begin a crew competition. We competed against each crew in a race. However, this race was not planned out at all. It started out by us doing a puzzle. After the puzzle came multiple other activities. What was the problem with this? Well, the winner of the puzzle was pretty much guaranteed to win, as everyone went to each station at the same time. As a result, competitiveness was super low, and just overall me nor the rest of the crew was really motivated after finishing the puzzle. We won second to last, unfortunately, but me and the rest of the crew really didn't care, so it really wasn't that big of a deal. Also want to mention some information about this crew. So it was overwhelmingly female. Like the only guys in this crew were me, the sophomore, and a freshman. The other 9 students were all freshmen and sophomore girls. Now from what I've seen from my female friends, they tend to get into a shit ton of drama. Like they seem to always gossip about guys and do a bunch of other stuff that I don't really understand since I'm not a girl. This trend, as you can expect, was very prevalent in crew. The girls were loud. They also did some really funny stuff, as our crew leader oftentimes would not be in the room. Sometimes I even had to close the door just because they were being so loud and I didn't want it to echo across the hallway. Yeah, they were crazy. Now, speaking of crew, let's talk about something cool that we got to partake in. So we had the chance to talk with Robert Ballard. Ballard was the man who discovered the Titanic. He pretty much discussed how he discovered the Titanic and what got him interested in the sea and all of that. We then got the chance to ask him questions. One student asked Ballard if one day humans might live underwater. He pretty much just told this kid that it would never happen, and even if it did, he wouldn't want to. Which, I mean, he's right about not wanting to. I wouldn't want to live underwater, but I disagree with the statement that it would never happen. The human race has achieved some really incredible achievements over the course of human history. From the dawn of civilization to the age of empires to the Middle Ages to the Renaissance to the founding of the United States and onwards, humans have done some really incredible things. Hell, 12 men have even set foot on the moon. That's insane. So with humans, pretty much anything is possible. However, Ballard went on to say some rather questionable and just downright weird stuff to elaborate. He pretty much turned that question into a discussion about climate change. Out of nowhere, he just started going Greta Thunberg on us. Pretty much everyone, including the teachers, made a look on that face that said, yeah, this dude's crazy. It's not that we thought this dude was crazy, it was that we thought this dude was crazy. Like, he was going on about how the world was going to end in 10 years from climate change and how fossil fuels are racist. Yeah, fossil fuels are racist. Not sure how we came to that conclusion. At this point, we couldn't tell if we were talking to the founder of the Titanic or a UMass professor. He is from San Diego, so that might explain it. But after a while, he finishes his rant and then we said goodbye and ended it. Afterwards, me and pretty much the rest of our crew, including our crew leader, were making fun of this dude for how crazy he was. So now let's talk about April 16th. So I did not attend school that day. My sister had a cheer competition in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, so we had to drive over there that afternoon, but we got into a ton of traffic, especially when we reached a city called Hendersonville, which is just a few miles south of Asheville. We got stuck in like an hour's worth of traffic. It was insane. We got through at least and reached Asheville, got on I-40, crossed the Tennessee state line, and then arrived in Gatlinburg. We stayed there all weekend. We arrived back home Sunday afternoon, so it was just Friday that I missed. I surprisingly had a lot of fun. I didn't have to see my sister's performance, which is what I definitely was dreading the whole trip. Instead, I got to do a lot of walking around as well as doing different activities. I also got to eat really well. It was a great trip. I love Tennessee, so that made it all better. In chemistry, we were studying nanotechnology. Nanotechnology is about nanobots, which are how small things they can fit like 2 molecules in them. And they could be used to create some new technologies in the future. We had to include a product that would be use nanotechnology to create a product to help mankind. We had to describe them, describe what problem they are solving, and describe how they would work. I chose to write about smart shirts. Smart shirts are nanotechnology to perform different tasks. As an example, smart shirts can be used to charge your phone or protect you from diseases. These are really cool conveniences. Only problem, these things cost like thousands of dollars each, and they are still in the process of development. So it might be a while before they hit the mainstream market, but it still is really cool to think that this might be the technology I use one day as an adult. Now, also in chemistry, we did a group project. So for this project, we had to create a 3D poster that represented a different level of the electromagnetic spectrum. We had to present information on it, such as its wave frequency, its uses, and its location on the electromagnetic spectrum. We were assigned this project on April 26th, and it was due May 7th, although technically it was due on May 21st, at the last day of school, since our teachers accept late work. By the way, the last day of school changed to May 21st. I worked in a group with 2 other people. One of these people was a girl who was as a grade considered to be probably the best artist in our grade. So therefore, I didn't have to worry about anything if it involved art. There was also a guy who, while I knew was only a B student, he was a very hard worker. Like, he did his very best on everything he did. And then there's me, who was an A student, who happens to have a specialty in math, which we'll see is pretty prevalent with pretty much anything that involves 3D objects. So our group of 3 was perfect. Now, as a group, we decided to do microwaves as our level. The reason we chose microwaves is because all 3 of us individually came up with creating a microwave. Like, we each shared our own ideas, and we all just happened to have the exact same idea, although each of our ideas had some minor differences. So we of course did microwave ideas since we were on board with it. However, we took some minor differences in each of our ideas and incorporated it into the final product. So one of my ideas was to write down the information on the door of the microwave. We did not do that because there wasn't enough space and it would make it a little messy. However, my group members did like the idea of using door to provide information. So we drew a microwave graph on the door. This made it less messy, but it was still an interesting touch. So let's talk about splitting our group's role. So I did all the mathematical planning and the research. I calculated how big the microwave would need to be. I also calculated how big the door would need to be to fit the graph. I even used trigonometry to determine how big the handle would be. Most of the calculations I did weren't too complex though. All I did was finding side lengths, area, and surface area. The handle had a little bit harder math, as that involved using the Pythagorean theorem, which even it isn't too complicated, although I also researched all the information we would need too. This is all that was done on Monday. We were given all week in class to work on it, by the way. Same would go for the next week. The next day, the girl brought some poster board and some construction paper and got to work. I handed her the calculations. If the math was done for her, she could pretty much create anything. So she began. The hardworking dude also helped her out. While they were building the microwave, I created the bibliography and to give credit to all the sources I used to find the information. I did it in APA format. At the end of the day, the microwave had been completed, so now all that was left was adding the information. The microwave was set on the poster board, by the way. It wasn't standing on its own, which is okay. In fact, it was actually required for it to be on the poster board, so we can include information. So that's what we did. The next day, we worked on incorporating the information and bibliography to the project. What we decided to do was to place the information on a menu that is standing on a poster. I thought it was kind of strange to have a menu beside a microwave, but it still worked and set a pretty cool aesthetic while presenting information. Then on Thursday, we made a basket of fries just for decoration, and we were finished. Yeah, we finished over a week early, and our project looked really good too, so now we had time to do whatever. We mostly visited other groups and talked with them. Now in American history, we wrote our final DBQ. This DBQ's prompt was, how did the United States contain communism? This is of course referring to the Cold War, where the United States and the Soviet Union competed to be the dominant superpower. In the end, the Soviet Union fell and the United States emerged as the world's only superpower. One thing the United States did during the Cold War was the process of containment. We did not want communism spreading to other countries. That's why we got involved in multiple wars throughout this time, most notably in Korea and Vietnam. That kind of plays into my main 3 points, which were the Berlin Airlift, the Korean War, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now this was a very easy paper to write. I wrote this paper in just one day, being April 30th. While you might think that I rushed through it, that's really all the time I needed. I had just released Storytime 18 on that day, so now more than ever I was confident in my writing. Therefore, I wrote this paper in one day and ended up making a 100 on it. The paper was also a fun read too. There was quite a lot of humor placed throughout it, mostly because about communism, since communism is funny, but the humor was well placed and made sense, so that benefited my grade. Overall, this is probably the easiest DBQ to write, mostly just because of my new experience in writing as well as just development, as a student since the Cabeza de Vaca DBQ in September. So then let's discuss English. So we were reading a book called The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. O'Brien served in the Vietnam War. He writes many books about his experiences in Vietnam. This is probably his most well-known book, as well as the one that brought him to fame. However, he writes this book in a very strange but really unique way. Instead of following the norm of writing chronologically, he goes all over the place. As a result, this book is more of a collection of short stories that represent his experiences in Vietnam. Another thing to mention about this book is that all the characters and their actions are fiction. Even O'Brien, who is a character himself, as well as, of course, the main character, is not real. It's a fictional O'Brien that represents the real O'Brien's experience. As a result, he was not writing about himself, but he still had the flexibility of choosing his own plot and stuff. If you ask me, that's genius. So now, like any war books, this was a very gruesome and vile read, but it was a really good one too. I enjoyed this book, and I definitely recommend it for those who don't mind gruesome and vile stories. Now, this is probably our biggest unit, if you want to call that. The reason is because we had a total of 4 projects that went along with it. Now, 3 of them were in May, so I'll just go ahead and mention the April project. So, well, 2 of them were in May. So, for this, we had to research a 4 projects. 3 of them were in May, and 1 was in April. So for this project, we had to research a certain topic relating to the background information. The background information was of course the Vietnam War. We were each assigned a specific topic to create a short presentation about. My topic was napalm. Napalm is a chemical that the United States deployed over Vietnam. This chemical had the ability to harm and even kill innocent people in an extremely slow and painful death. It was generally used to set forests on fire in order to take out the Viet Cong, which were a group of northern Vietnamese soldiers who were trained in guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare is the tactic of hiding from your enemy and catching them by surprise. So if you hear anybody whisper, "The trees are speaking Vietnamese," this is what they are referring to. That is why we ended up losing this war, as while we definitely were way stronger than they had strategy against us since they had known that land all their lives. So I created the presentation. However, we were supposed to present these on April 30th. I did not show up for class on April 30th, so I'll go ahead and explain why. So that morning, I did not have my voice. It actually kind of began that night prior, although I hadn't lost my voice completely. If you watch Storytime 18, that's why my voice sounded a little bit off compared to other Storytimes. I used to record Storytimes on Thursdays and then upload them on Fridays, so that's why I recorded on Thursday rather than Friday. I use a completely different process now, which I'm not going to get too much into detail since I'm getting off topic. Now, that morning, I didn't talk much. However, that morning I had a study hall. I spoke some, and this was probably the point where my voice was at its worst. Like, I was talking to a friend, and he was like, "Zach, are you okay?" I said I was fine. It was probably just allergies, which was probably true. Spring allergies are especially brutal on me, so this is probably just that. However, in American history, my principal called me. Someone told her about my voice, probably that friend. She just wanted to know if I was okay. I said I was fine, and I thought it was just allergies. We decided that I should still just go home, as it could have been coronavirus, since that's a symptom. So that's what I did. I went back to American history to get my stuff. My principal already let my teacher know what was happening. He gave me the assignment, and I was supposed to work on it in class and take it home. My principal also notified my English teacher what was happening, so she simply waived the presenting part on me on the background presentation. All I had to do was submit, which I had done that Wednesday. So I had everything done other than the American history assignment, which I did in like 15 minutes since it was about the Little Rock 9, which I was very familiar with. So that night, my parents pretty much made sure I was alright. They bought me some lifesavers to eat, as hard candy deals with the lost voice. They also bought some ice cream that helps with it. So then that night, I realized I only had 3 weeks left of school. I plan to discuss the school year in its entirety on May 28th for Storytime 22. I knew that this was going to be a long Storytime, even longer than Storytime 10, which was the word count record at the time, so I got to work that night while eating lifesavers, discussing why junior was so crazy but yet so calm. So now that brings us to the month of May. So if you watch Storytime 22, you remember this as being the longest month that took up over half the entire Storytime. The reason it did is because I wrote down the events the night they happened. Every night I would write down what happened that day at school, kind of like a journal, but not one at a time. However, it has now been 5 months since those events occurred. Enough time has passed for me to simply look back at it and be able to write it in the normal Storytime fashion. That's really the specific reason why I'm redoing the Storytime, just so I can write the month of May in the normal Storytime method. But even so, this was still the most chaotic month of the school year, so therefore I have a lot to talk about. So first, let's talk about college course, that I haven't talked about in a while, being trigonometry. So trigonometry was split into 4 modules. We took our module 4 test on Tuesday, May 4th. Now, unlike the other tests, this one had a pretty interesting situation happen. So for starters, it was raining, but I don't mean no drizzle. No, it was raining super heavily while thundering and lightning too. You're about to see how crazy it was raining in a little bit. Anyways, I left English at around 2:20 so that I would be on time to take this test. However, right as I exited the door, the power went out. The hallways, the classrooms, everything was pitch dark. I heard a few screams as well as some people wondering what the hell was happening. All of the teachers were ordered to go out in the hallways. Students were required to stay in their classes. I, however, was an exception, as I was on my way to class, so me and the teachers turned our flashlights on our phones. Then after 10 seconds, the power went back on. It was a really funny situation, but also kind of creepy since this occurred right as I exited English. Coincidence? Maybe. But that's not even the chaotic part. The most chaotic part was getting onto trigonometry. So my truck was about 400 feet from the front office. Therefore, I would have to run in some pretty crazy rain. So I did that. I ran as fast as I could while saying as many cuss words you can think of. When I reached my truck, I was already completely soaking wet. Like I was so wet that the rain had dripped into my shorts and got on my phone and my wallet wet. My phone did not get damaged, as it had a waterproof case on it. My wallet was also not damaged. So then I drove over to where trigonometry took place. However, even so, I still had to run some 200 feet to get to the building. So I did just that. Even though it was a shorter run, I was still completely soaked. Fortunately, I was 5 minutes early, so I went to the bathroom and dried myself off with some paper towels. I only dried my hands, arms, and hair, as that's all I needed to dry to make sure I didn't get my test wet. Now, my professor allowed us to use a note card in each test. I had a note card with me, but by the grace of God, that note card was not damaged in the rain, so therefore, I had a note card for reference. Now, after going through all that, you would expect it to be a difficult test. After all, I was still soaking wet and my hands were kind of sticky, but I actually did incredible. I made a 97 on this test. I only missed one question, which involved an ambiguous case with 2 triangles, the toughest topic in the entire course. I was really surprised, as I thought I was going to make a C, but no, the outside factors had no effect on my ability to do the math. Now, once we finished the test, our professor lets us leave when we finish. I finished this test in about 45 minutes, so after finishing the test, I handed it to my professor and walked out. Fortunately, I did not have to run into my truck like I did earlier that day. It completely stopped raining, and now there was a serene atmosphere as far as the eye could see. This felt really nice, especially after all that chaos that happened earlier. So in other news, how about we return to crew? Yes, that one class I was growing a love-hate relationship with. So let's talk about another project that made me question crew. So this was the annual Rube Goldberg machine. Every year we did this project. It's probably my least favorite one crew does, as I've never really understood why we did it or what it was supposed to teach. It was really just busy work. Now, first off, what even is a Rube Goldberg? Well, it's a device that's supposed to perform a task in the most complicated way possible. It's also supposed to follow a sequence of events, each being unique. That's really the best way to put it. I recommend just looking them up on YouTube, as it'll help you get a better idea of what I'm talking about since it's really difficult to explain orally. So I've talked about doing stuff in crew. That makes no sense in what our problems were presented. The biggest problem with this project was instruction. Our teacher failed to provide adequate instruction. The school created a rubric that involved what needed to be put on and played in order for anything to be counted. Like it included the final thing was supposed to happen, the due date, how many events, and setting up process everything. However, our teacher did not send us the rubric. Therefore, we were unaware of many of the topics we were going on. All we knew was to create a Rube Goldberg on Friday, May 10th. Now, like our other crew projects, I took the leader role since I was the oldest student in crew. So we first worked on this project on Monday, May 10th. We had to create ideas and set a plan for what we wanted to bring. The next day we brought our stuff. I brought the string. We also drew out how this would work. Then on Wednesday, May 12th, we got to work. So we included a lot of swinging and falling at different angles. Everyone except me and a freshman was building. I was doing all the math that involved each step as we went. This freshman was using a meter stick to measure different lengths. She would then tell me those lengths and I would calculate with what the group needed, such as string, length, frequency, and other stuff. I seemed to be the only student in the whole crew whose strength was math, so I pretty much blew away everyone from stuff even as simple as the Pythagorean theorem, although I did of course calculate a lot harder stuff, such as law of sines and other trigonometry when determining steps that were on an incline. However, this math would prove to be pretty much useless the next day. Why? Because our teacher decided that she wanted it to be set up in the biology lab. Why? I just did all the math for no reason. She pretty much just asked that we redo the whole thing the day before it was due too. Yeah, that's some really bad planning on her part. So we had to do that. Me and the rest of the group tried to brainstorm ideas, which we were successful in, but not quite. The reason because of the next day. So this was the day we learned that we had to have a set ending step. We also learned that we were supposed to get a rubric we never got. So as the crew, we were pissed off. We told the counselor about this, who was over all the crew. She understood this and gave us an extra day to work on it. The extra day was on Monday. Anyways, a few sophomores worked extensively on this project during seminar, in which they were not doing anything. I couldn't work during seminar as we were doing the financial literacy course, but those sophomores worked so hard, and ultimately it came to the last second on Monday. We had completely finished our project, as we all we had left was to record a video of our Rube Goldberg in action. As leader, I got to do the honors to start it. This took us a couple tries, but literally our final minute of crew on Monday, we had the magic attempt of it working. When we finished, the whole crew went ballistic. We actually did it. We finished what we called the impossible. This felt incredible. While we were still pissed off at our teacher for not giving us instructions, we were still happy that we finished it. So that means that now I can move away from crew for the time being. How about we talk about American history? So the 1960s was known for their music. From people like Elvis Presley to bands like the Beatles, they had a legendary music scene. So to accommodate this, we did a project that involved us creating a 1960s album. For this, we had to choose 10 songs that relate to a topic from the 1960s. Whether it be about the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, or even the Cold War as a whole, we had to choose 10 songs from that time from the topic. It did not have to be the 1960s specific, so if we wanted to include a song from like the 80s, we could do that. We were also allowed to pair up with a partner if we'd like. I worked with my friend Logan on this. We chose to do the Cold War as a whole, since this would give us a larger time frame to work with. It also allowed us to include some meme songs here too, like we included both the Soviet Union anthem and Moscow, so that's already 2 songs down. Now the thing about this album is that it had to have a booklet that lists each song, which what they were about, and why we included them. I don't remember the songs, nor do I have the booklet with me, but I do remember us color coding them to where all the blue pages were done by me and the red pages were done by Logan. The front cover had some art to go along with it. Logan drew this. He drew the United States versus the Soviet Union and Smash Bros like theme, but it didn't interfere with the front cover text, which included our names as well as our time period. In the end, we only made an 89 on this project. The printer must have had a seizure while printing out Logan's pages, as his pages were somewhat unpleasant to look at. We also had apparently, as we're supposed to have an artwork on each page, so that messes us up too, but we still made an 89. Both of us were making a high A, so we didn't really care since this didn't affect our grade much. So let's discuss chemistry. So on May 6th, we began a project. This project involved us doing 2 experiments. This project was dealing with qualitative and quantitative data. So for the first experiment, we worked with qualitative data. Qualitative data is data that deals with the senses, being sight, smell, taste, hear, and touch. We only did sight and hear, as tasting the stuff isn't exactly a good idea. We worked with baking soda and calcium chloride when these 2 substances were mixed into water. To do this, we were split into different groups. My group consisted of me, a guy named Edward, and a girl who requested to not be named. We did 3 trials during this experiment. The first trial involved us mixing baking soda and water. When this happened, the bag that was holding the solution was super cold. We then recorded our observations and threw away the bag. The second trial involved us mixing calcium chloride and water. When this happened, the bag that was also holding the solution became super hot. Because of this, we 3 took turns holding it because even though it was hot, it was still really comfortable to hold. We then recorded down our observations, and unfortunately, we had to throw it away. The third and final trial involved us mixing baking soda, calcium chloride, and water all at the same time. Now, me and Edward both were aware of what would the outcome be. We both knew that the bag would explode due to pressure of both hot and cold chemicals. The reason we knew this is because we did this experiment in 8th grade science. Even though we did that experiment in January 2018, we still remember what happened. What happened is that one group had this really crazy but very lovable kid. He was pretty much the class clown of the class. He shook each trial very excessively, so he did it with this trial, and after about 10 seconds, the white sticky solution in the bag blew up all over him. It was really funny seeing this. So knowing this, me and Edward warned the girl what was going to happen, and she listened to us. Therefore, she shook it for only like 3 seconds to set it back on the table. We didn't watch the bag do its own thing. However, the bag had a different reaction than it did in 8th grade. This time, the bag pulled itself upright. The solution also began to dissolve. Edward then picked it up a little bit to shake it a little. He also touched the bottom of the bag and said, "It's warm, boy." He then set the bag down. About 5 seconds later, the bag still had a solution in it, but the problem had grown, so instead of exploding, it managed to dissolve the bag itself and leaned onto the table. We then recorded our observations. Afterwards, we got some paper towels and then cleaned it up. The next day, May 7th, we did the second experiment. This is pretty much trials 1 and 2 from the first experiment again, but instead we recorded quantitative data. Quantitative data is data recorded numerically. We did things like recording temperature, pH, time, and more. How we set this experiment up is that we would do each trial for 7 minutes. Every minute, we recorded the temperature and pH. We of course recorded these through a table to organize our data, as tables are the easiest way to set up quantitative data. We did this with both baking soda and calcium chloride. From the qualitative data, you could probably guess what happened, so I'm not going to explain the results. So then came the project. We were assigned this project on Monday, May 10th. For this project, we had to synthesize our data and place it on an 8.5 by 11 inch piece of construction paper. This was due on Friday, May 14th. For this, we had to include our quantitative data, our qualitative data, and some illustrations and explanations. This is a really easy project. The girl who was good at art, so she drew the illustrations. Edward recorded the information as well as created the table. I formatted the table as well as traced the information in illustrations. We did this very quickly, finishing on Wednesday, May 12th. We made 100 on this. So now let's discuss English for a second. So we had 3 projects for the things they carried, so I'll go ahead and just talk about each of them individually. The first project we had, for the first project, we had to write a short book about our own experiences in the style of O'Brien. What we had to do was that we had some things that we were required to do. The other things that were optional. We had to choose at least 2 of the optional stuff. The required stuff was a title page with the title of our book, our name, and some artwork. Then there was the table of contents, which included every section of the book. We also had to have an about the author page where we included information about ourselves, what we learned, what we plan to take into senior year and beyond, and a picture of ourselves. Then we had to write 3 chapters, just like each chapter is written in the things they carried. Then we had our back cover, which had to include a summary of our book, as well as 2 positive reviews from classmates. I'll talk more about them later. Now, we had multiple optional stuff we could do. We had to do at least 2 of them. Mine were writing a 4th chapter and an inspirations page where I wrote who inspired me. So, what did I write for this book? Well, I decided to write about my swimming career. Of course, it was the first one, since the second one started a month after this. The reason is because I chose to write about swimming was because while writing this book, I was working on Storytime 19. Storytime 19 was a redo of Storytime 8, which was about my swimming career. Therefore, having this information fresh on my mind would make this book a lot easier to write than if I had gone to write about something else like a school year or a church event or something. I've decided to call this book Shark in the Water. This is a metaphor, comparing my coach to a shark. Sharks are known for being mean and scary, and they make you scared to get in the water. My coach was literally the same way. Now, since I was doing the 4th chapter option, I only needed to write 4. However, I decided to write 5 just because I love writing. If you saw Storytime 19, you will be very familiar with these topics, so I won't go into too much detail about them. The first chapter was called The Final Practice, where I discussed my final practice with the team and all that bullshit that went down with my coach. Chapter 2 was called Dedication. This chapter discussed seeing our best swimmer on the team way back in June 2016 swim a super fast 50 free, which is kind of the event that got me really into swimming. Chapter 3 was called Cracked Out of Water. This chapter was about how I broke both of my arms, which doesn't need much of an explanation since the last story time was about this. Chapter 4 was called The Flapper. This discussed how my coach always put me in the 200 butterfly every event. Of course, in reality, it was just a 100 fly, but I still did a 200 fly so that this book wouldn't be 100% true. I also discussed the drama that occurred between us regarding the second to last swim meet in March 2018 and the last swim meet in November 2018, as well as the swim meet I did not attend in January 2019. The final paragraph was called The Aftermath. This discussed what happened after I quit swimming, which was pretty much just a super brief explanation of post-depression period part 2. Now, for the back cover, I had 2 of my friends write a peer review. One of those was a friend named Logan. The other was a friend named Peter. I also would write a review on each of their books too. Overall, this is a really well-written book, and I always have a blast going back and reading this book. My English teacher also enjoyed reading this book, as she stated that she loved the humor in this book. Now, the second project in regards to the things they carried was the group project. If you've watched Storytime 30, you might be able to recall us doing a Yaya box as our project for the Joy Luck Club. That's pretty much what we did for this project. To refresh you on what a Yaya box is a box that is supposed to represent a character. The outside of the box includes things that other characters, as well as the audience, knows about this character. The inside of the box includes things that only the audience might know, also known as dramatic irony. We as a group chose to do our box on Jimmy Cross, who is the leader of the platoon. Now, who did my group consist of? Well, it consisted of the people I sat with. So therefore, it was me and 4 other boys. All of us were good friends, so that made things easier. The boys consisted of me, Edward, Jackson, the kid who broke his laptop in Spanish, Logan, and Peter. Now, I came up with much of the planning for this project. I planned out each detail as well as determined how to go about this project. I also worked on a specific detail myself. This was a burn-up letter. So in the first chapter, Cross keeps thinking of a girl named Martha, who writes him a bunch of letters. However, he gets distracted by thinking about her and a member of his platoon gets killed. He then proceeds to burn up all the letters she sent him. So what I did was that I wrote the letter. The letter wasn't specifically stated in the book, so I had to write one myself, but with details outlined in the book. One of the boys, I think Logan, burned up the paper and ripped it to make it look like it had survived the fire. This letter was placed inside the box since the only characters who seemed to know about this were Cross, Martha, and O'Brien. It also represented Cross on the inside, as Martha meant a lot to him. Now, the actual process of creating this Yaya box took all the way up to the very last day, but we got it done and our teacher gave us 100 for it, as she stated herself that she was impressed with it. So, the finishing product involved the box being spray painted black. The black symbolized death, which of course is seen with one of the platoon members. Surrounding the box was barbed wire, which is of course representing the war. That's all we needed on the outside. On the inside, we painted the box pink in order to represent love, as seen with Martha. The letter I wrote was also placed here. I do not remember the rest of the details, but I do know that there was a lot of them. So let's discuss the final project for the things they carried, as well as the final project in English. So this project was assigned on May 10th. This was a paper. It was kind of similar to how DBQs in American history were formatted, being 5-paragraph essays. However, these were more personal papers. They were about us, not history. This was pretty much an intensive paper, if you remember from Storytime 30 or 35. Our prompt for this paper was things we carry, where we had to describe what we carry. This might sound confusing, but basically, if we were drafted and had to fight in a war in a foreign country, what 3 objects will we carry? I chose a $1 bill my grandfather signed before he died, a letter my sister wrote while I was in the mental hospital, and the Dorito I made in art while my arms were broken. The reason we did this essay was because of our college admissions, we needed to write a 5-paragraph essay. We also could use this essay as our college admissions essay. I did not use this essay when I applied to college, as I just didn't feel like it and give a full picture of who I am, but I still did it for an English project, which I made 100 on. So how about we diverge away from high school and talk a little bit about the end of college. College ends a little earlier than high school, so that's why I'll still have some stuff to talk about regarding school. Ethics had nothing going for it, as there was no final or any final assignment for it, so I'll start by talking about Spanish. So like Spanish 1, I also had a final exam for Spanish 2. It worked out just like the one for Spanish 1. However, I didn't do as well. I made a 90 on it, which is still really good. I also didn't get a nice job, Zach, since I took this test at 2 in the morning. Now, I saved trigonometry for last, because this one had a pretty big story to go with it. So this test was split into 2 parts. The first was a take-home multiple choice exam. This was a very straightforward and simple test. I made a 97 on it. The only reason I missed a question is because I forgot to divide by 2 when finding the area of a triangle. This test was worth 60% of our final grade. Now, the next part of the test was the in-class written tests were 40% of our final grade. So not final grade, final exam grade. So coming into this test, I was super hyped. I was ready for this test. Now, one weird thing about though was that it seemed like everyone knew I was about to take this test. My English teacher let me out 10 minutes early just so I could arrive on time to take this test, and I didn't even tell her or anybody. Some students even wished me good luck on it, which also blew me away. Then I went past the front office to get to my truck and drive over there. The lady at the front desk wished me good luck on this test too. How the hell do y'all know that I'm taking a final exam? Like, I'm actually kind of creeped out now, but I still thanked her and went out to my truck and headed on out. Another thing to mention too, why is everyone all wishing me good luck? Well, this class is actually considered to be the hardest class early college students are offered. I personally disagree, as I think there are a few courses that are even harder, but that's just me. But trigonometry is literally my specialty, so my opinion really isn't too accurate. But still, people knew that this was a serious test, so they wanted to wish me luck before taking it. So then I arrived. As soon as I arrived, my professor gave me the test as well as the papers to do work on. I then got to work. So this test was 11 questions long. However, my professor said that she would grade only 10 of the questions. If we got a question wrong, she would count it as our 11th question and not grade it. So she was very lenient on this exam. We also got to use 4 note cards on this test too. Now, I knew beforehand that there would be 2 questions that would really kick my ass. Those were graphing tangent curves and ambiguous case with 2 triangles. Fortunately, there were no tangent curves. However, there was an ambiguous case problem, so as you can expect, I got a little bit scared. But then all of a sudden, my brain went beast mode, and without even thinking, I began writing down numbers and equations and a bunch of other stuff. It's as if my brain decided, I know how to do this, and just had me write down everything. Ultimately, I got it right. I made 100 on this part of the exam. So that was May 11th. This was also the final day of college courses, so therefore, I was done with college. For my final college grades, I made a 91 in Spanish Lab, 94 in Spanish 2, 97 in Ethics, and a 97 in Trigonometry. Speaking of trigonometry, I remember our professor at the beginning of the course stating that our students generally make a letter grade lower in trigonometry than in pre-calc. I had the opposite effect, as I made an 85 in pre-calc, so that's kind of funny what happened to me. So let's talk about chemistry a little bit. So Wednesday, May 12th, we did an experiment with soap before finishing our poster. Let's just say that we did a lot of things you probably shouldn't do. So the way this worked is that we first got 4 soap solids, if that's what you want to call it. Each solid was different. We then put them in a styrofoam cup. Then we added some coconut oil to the cup. Then comes the part that was probably not a good idea. Putting the cups in the microwave. Definitely not a good idea. Our teacher said 30 seconds, but when the girl in my group went to do hers, her cup melted and made a big mess in the microwave. So after that, we shortened it to 15 seconds. 15 seconds was good enough to melt the soap, but not the cup. Afterwards, we got to dye our cup. I chose to dye mine red, white, and blue. Merca, as my American history teacher would call it. However, the results in mixing these colors were as pink. So therefore, instead of referring to this as Merca, I referred to it as my Barbie. I then set it in a plastic container for it to sit for the rest of the day, and at the end of the day, I got to take it home. I now had to borrow soap. Then at the end of the day, our English teacher let us out early so we could pick up our soaps. However, when I got to the chemistry lab, I noticed an extremely eerie smell. I asked Lucas what happened, as he had chemistry at the time. He was also with a couple of his friends, who helped explain to me. What happened was that our chemistry teacher picked up a glass of dye. Then she tripped over and fell. That glass then broke and spilled a shit ton of dye across the floor. It miraculously did not spill on our chemistry teacher. She didn't just lay there and yelled something incomprehensible. Half the class came over and helped her up and made sure she was okay, while the other half went to clean up the mess. Our teacher then wrote "RIP floor" on the whiteboard. Pretty funny situation. Even though I didn't see it for myself, I knew it was true because the whole lab smelled like dye. Another funny thing that happened was that while we were getting our soap, there was a kid who was a little bit clumsy. He picked up the soap. However, in the middle of the lab, he accidentally dropped the soap. Everyone, and I mean everyone in the lab, looked at him. Another kid then literally shouted, "Oh yeah!" and everyone, including our chemistry teacher, burst out into laughter. Then while we were all walking to our cars, we made a bunch of dropping the soap jokes. Then on Thursday, May 13th, let's talk about our final American history project. So 2020 was a very rough year for all of us. A bunch of crazy shit happened, from World War III to coronavirus to political unrest and a bunch more. So for our final project, we were going to do something kind of similar to closing the West mural from January, but this was not going to be an individual project. It was not going to be a group project. It was not even going to be a class project. It was going to be a whole grade-wide project. Therefore, what happened was that chemistry was now shortened so that we would all work on this together. Firstly, we appointed a leader for this project. That leader was the girl who I worked with on the microwave project in chemistry. This project had a very heavy focus on artwork, since she was the best when it came to art. So she led the class. She also did much of the planning. So what we did was that we had a giant earth with a circumference of about 12 feet. Then on top of the earth was a large rectangle, which was a face mask. Then we were all split into small groups to draw and decorate our individual parts of the mask. These topics could range from coronavirus to the election, the Black Lives Matter, to really any big topic from 2020. My group was me and 3 friends. Our assigned topic was World War III. Well, not really a war, we were just expressing the missile attack on General Soleimani, who was a terrorist from Iran. So the way my group expressed this was by drawing the United States and the Iran. We didn't draw a missile flying out of the United States directly to Iran. We didn't color the flags onto each country. It looked really good. Now, the end result of the grade project was not just a good project, it was a masterpiece. It perfectly portrayed all the bullshit that happened in 2020. I believe the world events topics included stuff like World War III, coronavirus, Black Lives Matter, the 2020 election, the Beirut explosion, the Israel peace treaties with United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, Kim Jong-un almost dying, China's rise to power, the Armenia versus Azerbaijan conflict, and a whole lot more. We also included many pop culture events too. I believe those included Among Us, Dream, George, Sapnap, Minecraft, Goku with the drip, Grubhub, the Coffin Dancers, the Travis Scott Burger, and so much more. A whole lot happened that year, and we perfectly included all of it onto one image, which really makes this special. We all did a fantastic job on this. We did this in May rather than January, but we couldn't do it in January since we weren't together. But now that we were back together, we could create this. Our teacher gave everyone 100 for this. So now let's move on to next week, the final week of school, more specifically Monday, May 17th. Oh my god, this day was crazy. This day had more drama than in any other day at school since freshman year. Yeah, we're about to dive into some really crazy shit. So let's set the stage by starting off in chemistry. So every Monday morning, we did a thing called Monday Circle. Our chemistry teacher got this idea from our biology teacher, who did this with us before we had to do online school. There was this girl who started ranting about our English teacher. Now remember, this was the same English teacher we had as a freshman. If you watched Storytime 30, you would know how much I hated her at first. I didn't do my work as a freshman, and she tried to get me on to it. Late into freshman year, I started doing my work and she started to really like me. It then had a boomerang effect and I began respecting her. This made having her in junior year a lot easier. She did this with students who didn't do their work. The girl was one of them. However, she continued to not do her work even through junior year. So she didn't decide to vent in Monday Circle. After a minute of venting, our chemistry teacher ended it, and thankfully so. I don't want to end with her yapping, so it was too early in the morning for that. Then let's fast forward to English. So this is when shit went from 0 to 100. So there was a couple people who did not do their book project. So our English teacher took them out individually. That girl venting was one of them. After she got back, our teacher then called another student. While she was talking with the other student, the girl started venting. She said a lot of pretty bad stuff about her teacher. Like I think she even called her a bitch at one point. Then our teacher was done with that student, but the girl continued to rant, even with our teacher walking in. Our teacher didn't ask her what she's talking about, but instead of saying nothing or talking about something different, she continued her rant, but this time directed towards our teacher. She started out kind of calm. She told her teacher about what she hated about her, which I mean, that's not bad. Constructive criticism is a good thing, but as she progressed, she became more aggressive. One of her claims was that our teacher assigned too much work. She said that she never got home until 9, which I would understand if it wasn't for the fact that we were given so much time in school to work on the stuff. Every day in seminar, we were given 45 minutes to work on schoolwork. I noticed that every day, she was either on her phone or talking to her friends, so already her arguments aren't valid. We were also given like 5 weeks to work on both the book and the Yaya box, so there was no excuse, and the Yaya box was always worked in class. However, she then proceeded to destroy all of her credibility when she just began to freak out on her teacher. Like at this point, you couldn't even understand what she was saying, as she was making a huge scene in the class. Our teacher remained calm and then sent her to the office. At least she got suspended for a day. How our teacher stayed calm through though is beyond me. Like I sure wouldn't be able to stay calm in that situation. I probably would have beat her ass. So now the class was kind of in chaos. We were all like, what the hell just happened? When our teacher returned, she shut the door and then apologized for what happened. We then had a pretty long talk about her teaching, and she took this to heart. We all then gave her actual constructive criticism in order to improve her as a teacher. Now, this drama started a pretty big dispute throughout the class on which side we chose. Most people chose the girl's side. I took my teacher's side, but it's because this girl didn't do her work, and even with the time she had. And plus, I know she doesn't work more than 25 hours a week, so she could use her weekends to do her work. It's not rocket science. Now, I bring this up because stuff like this almost never happens at our school. We're all here because we want to be here. Sure, we all have our criticisms of our teacher. I've criticized almost every single teacher I've had in at least one story time, but I do it in either a respectful or joking way. Wow, how about we go back earlier in the day and talk about seminar and American history, as both of those have some funny stories. So firstly, let's talk about seminar. So we were working on our mural project. This is when while we were working on it, me and the boys in the group thought, what if we ran our American history teacher for president? Well, he wasn't 35 yet. He will be by 2024, so that works. He's also a natural born citizen, and he's been a citizen for all of his life. So he fits the requirements for being president, so we decided to jokingly run him for president. We didn't say that his vice president will be our old sophomore English teacher, the one before my sophomore English teacher came to our school. We also stated that the current sophomore English teacher was going to be press secretary, our junior English teacher was going to be chief justice, then Aaron was going to be the head of the FBI, as that's actually what he wants to do when he grows up. This spread like a rumor. It spread super quickly throughout the class. It didn't reach our teacher. When he heard this, he was all bored for it. He then appointed me to be Department of Defense. So he also proposed some executive orders he would sign. For one, he would make it illegal to say America. Instead, you have to say America, just like he said it in class. He would also put up our quote wall in the Oval Office, although he would probably need something bigger if he was to include stuff from the news, since they say a lot of stupid shit. Now, let's talk about what happened in American history that day. This involves a prank being played. Now, you might think that we played a prank on our teacher. That's not what happened. He actually played a prank on us, more specifically me. So we were talking about the presidency of Bill Clinton. We talked about what things as who he was, what bills he passed, Monica Lewinsky, and all that other stuff. But after doing the lecture, we were split into different groups and discussed post-Cold War NATO actions. We didn't discuss Monica Lewinsky too much since that would be a little bit too interesting for us. So then we were given 6 different scenarios and had to find information from them. I had scenario 3, but another person in my group also had scenario 3, so we were confused. Therefore, we asked our teacher. He said I should have gotten scenario 4, so I went over to my original seat to check. Our teacher then just died laughing. Turns out, scenario 4 didn't exist, so I didn't have to do anything, as I didn't have a scenario to do. Since then, he as well as the rest of the class has given me a hard time about it. Now, staying on the subject of American history, let's move on to the next day, May 18th. So this was another funny situation. We were discussing the presidency of George W. Bush, as well as 9/11. We also discussed the Iraq resolution, where we decided to invade Iraq and kill Saddam Hussein. So to help understand this, we did 3 inquiries. We were all given all 3 inquiries at the same time. However, we had to follow everyone else. We cannot get ahead. But that's when Aaron decided to get a little cocky. He chose to get ahead. Our teacher noticed this, so we quietly walked over there and snatched the paper from Aaron. He then tore it twice and taped it to the quote wall. He then called this a piece of art. We all, including Aaron, started laughing. We also proceeded to sarcastically state that Aaron was the greatest artist in the history of mankind. He was then given another sheet of paper to redo it. We were only on the first inquiry, so it wasn't like he got too far ahead. Now, the next day in chemistry, we took our final. Wait, just a minute. I thought there weren't any finals for high school courses. Well, yeah, standardized tests. But our teachers were ordered by the state to create their own finals. For American history, our final was considered a 2020 midterm. For English, it was the Yaya box. For chemistry, it was a test. This test was really straightforward though. We could do it at any time we'd like, as long as it was before Friday. I did it on Tuesday night, in which I made a 95. Now you might be asking why I stated that we took it on Wednesday. The reason is because on this day, our teacher gave us time to take it on. Since I had already finished it on Tuesday, I spent that time on my phone. And now, how about we talk about my final grades for each class? So for American History 1, I made a 91. Then in American History 2, I made a 94. In English, I made a 98. And then in Chemistry, I made a 97. So let's jump a little bit to crew. So we did a one-day crew project. While the rest of the crew did, I did not do anything with this project. The reason is because I was instead helping my English teacher decorate a cornhole board. So she had a cornhole board that she wanted to paint. However, she wanted to do it in a specific design and wanted to make it exact. She knew that math was my thing, and I think she called the perfect guy to help, as this also involved a lot of trigonometry. There was also a freshman already working on it, trying to place tape over the board, but of course being a freshman, she didn't really know how to mathematically calculate this design perfect. So that's where I came in. I solved a lot of the problems. I also told the freshman how long each piece of tape needed to be, and she taped it. It worked out great. Now in American history, we had our notebook check. So since we are all back together, we're not writing our notes down on paper instead of using our Chromebooks for everything. So now we had a notebook, but our teacher wanted to grade these notebooks for completion and other stuff and all that. But he did not want to have to grade 20 notebooks all at once. So we each got to grade someone else's notebook. We took off 5 points for every missing one. The one that I graded a few of those, so they ended up making I think a 75. I only had two missing for mine. So I made a 90. But here's an example of my teacher messing around with me in regards to scenario 4. So when we got to the post-Cold War NATO assignment, our teacher said, if scenario 4 is not done, that's okay. Unless you're grading Bayards, then you have to count points off. Everyone, including me, started laughing. However, the person grading mine almost marked all 5 points on me. My teacher then said, oh, they were ready, Zach. This made us laugh more. I laughed too, but on the inside, my mind was going, bitch, you better not. So then the second to last day of school. So that morning in seminar, the whole junior class gathered around and did Junior Dundee Awards. This was where we got to poke fun at everyone for something. We all won an award, so we all got made fun of. The award I got was most likely to get his hands on some illegal francium. Mostly just because of all the projects involving francium and chemistry. Afterwards, everyone was asked to tell one story that happened throughout the school year. I chose to tell 2 stories since both of them were so funny that I couldn't choose between one or the other. I first told the story about going to that trigonometry test during a thunderstorm and the school having a blackout. The other one I told was about scenario 4. After Junior Dundee Awards came crew, but this wasn't any normal day for crew. No, it was a crew competition. What happened is that there were different activities that involved each crew competing against one another. Each activity awarded a point. Whichever crew had the most points won the competition. In our crew, each student participated in one activity. The activity that I participated in involved throwing ping pong balls into cups. We were given 2 tries to try to throw a ping pong ball into a cup. There were 3 different types of cups. One was a 10-pointer, a few were 5-pointers, but there was also a couple negative 5-pointers, which would decrease your score. I went first. My first shot missed, but right before I took my second shot, a girl from my crew shouted, "Zach, remember your trigonomic functions or whatever the hell you do in math." That actually got me thinking about special right triangles. The wind was blowing at around 2 miles an hour to the right, so therefore, I determined that I would need to throw the ball at a 45-degree angle on the left so that the wind would push it to the right. That's what I did. I ended up getting into a 5-pointer. Surprisingly, nobody else was able to get any more points. There was a kid who got in a cup, but that was a negative 5-pointer, so our crew won that event, but I don't think we won the competition, although we might have, I just don't remember who won. So then later on that day in English, let's talk about later on that day in English. So we did an ACT prep in class. Even though we had already taken the ACT, it was just for us to review if we wanted to take it again. However, once we finished, our teacher announced that we would have officially completed American literature. The whole class erupted into applause. Our English teacher joined us. That kind of reminds me of freshman year after taking the English final exam. When our teacher told us we completed the final, we all started clapping, which wasn't normal to do after a final, so it was kind of like a throwback to that moment. And finally, we reached Friday, May 21st, the last day of school. So the first day, of course, was chemistry. In chemistry, to celebrate it being the last day of school, we all brought our own coffee mugs. With these, we made a cake, but in coffee mugs. We then added the cake mix and all that, and then we put our mug into the refrigerator. It surprisingly was really good. I didn't expect it to be that good, as I was eating out of a coffee mug, but it was still great. It did taste a little bit like coffee, though, which is strange because I got this mug directly out of the dishwasher, but even so, the cake was so good. Now, I actually didn't spend all my time in chemistry eating cake. Before I even went to chemistry, my English teacher asked me what class I had. I told her that I was going to chemistry. She knew what we were doing that day, so she told me that after I eat my cake, if I would come help her with another cornhole board. I did that. It was the same deal with that other freshman, just that I did this all by myself rather than that freshman helping me. It went by very well. Then at 10:30, my English teacher came over to check on how I was doing. I had just completed the board. She then took me to my next and final thing for school that day. This was the award ceremony. It went very well. I didn't earn any awards, but it was still a very nice way to wrap up the school year. It ended at 11 o'clock. Afterwards, we could leave straight forward after and go home if we had a verbal permission. I would get permission later on, but before I left, I actually showed Edward what I was doing on our English for our English teacher. He's also a math person, so he was able to check my work as well as look over everything. Then I went and called Dad to ask if I could go ahead and go home. He was at home that day since he was working from home at the time. He said sure, and once I got home, we'll go eat we were gonna go get something to eat. So that's what happened. We went over to Zaxby's and both of us got a 6-piece chicken finger plate. Now, going back a little bit to Wednesday, I want to talk about getting some free money. So the college my school is affiliated with applied to give out free money to students. They were granted the money were given $200 to each student with at least a 2.0 GPA. I remember getting my $200 and I was confused. So I asked my counselor about it Thursday morning, and she made sense of it. So yeah, I now had $200 to enjoy. Therefore, I decided to buy Miitopia for the Switch that day. Miitopia was a game that I used to be hooked on back in late 2017 and early 2018, so I was really excited to see it getting rebooted onto the Switch. So I bought it and played it. I believe I beat it in like 2 days. Ironically, this is the same date that the game came out, so I bought it the day it came out. This is the second game I had ever done that with, the other being Bloons Tower Defense 6 back in June 2018. This was also my grandmother's 76th birthday, so to celebrate, we took her out to the Cheesecake Factory in South Park, which is the really rich part of Charlotte. We had pretty bad service, but we were really funny. Like, Mom was reading out the different cheesecakes they offered, and our waiter then started to write them down. Mom noticed, and we told him that we were just reading them out, but it was so funny. We almost ordered the entire menu. That shit's expensive too, so we would have been paying a ton for that stuff. And so yeah, that's the end of my junior year. What a crazy year. Even though it was probably the worst school year ever, it was still a blast and had many great moments. I did many things, such as make all A's all year long, which hadn't happened since 7th grade. I did multiple projects, I grew closer with my peers, and more. I also did not do some things like Scenario 4, but nonetheless, junior year was very successful. So that's all I got for today's story time. Next week, on October 8th, I'll be discussing my